Hey guys, tonight we begin with a mystery from the ancient world, one that smells faintly of olive oil, sweat, and glory. You look at modern sports science with its heart monitors, protein shakes, and people running in shoes that cost more than rent, yet somehow those old Greek records still sit there like smug little inscriptions in stone, refusing to budge. You will see bare feet kicking up dust, bodies shining in the sun, and a stadium full of people who absolutely do not believe in pacing themselves. And the deeper you go, the stranger it gets, because these athletes trained in ways that would probably get banned by every modern committee. So, before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You arrive in Olympia feeling the heat press against your skin in a way that makes you wonder if the sun was closer to the earth in ancient times or if the gods just enjoyed slow roasting visitors. The air tastes like dust and olive trees, and every step kicks up a tiny cloud that clings to your sandals. You move forward, weaving between travelers who all look like they have been training their whole lives just to stand impressively in a line. Everyone carries the same expression, a mix of anticipation and the quiet terror of realizing they might have forgotten something important at home, like their lucky charm or their ability to run without wheezing. The stadium rises in front of you in a long curve of pale stone, already buzzing with energy. You can feel it in the ground, a low hum, as if the earth itself is vibrating with the memory of every foot that ever pounded across its surface. Nothing here feels passive. Even the birds seem to fly with purpose, circling overhead like they are scouting for the next champion. You step closer, and the heat radiating off the stone feels alive, the kind that wraps around you and decides you will not be comfortable again for several hours. As you take in the crowd, you notice the strange mixture of scents, from crushed herbs to sweat that has aged into a fully developed personality. People push past with baskets brimming with food and pottery, talking loudly about athletes they have never met but swear they know everything about. You hear someone behind you boasting that his cousin's friend once trained alongside a runner who could outrun a horse if the horse was feeling lazy. You keep walking, because there is something magnetic ahead, something that pulls you forward like curiosity with a firm grip. When you step into the full view of the stadium floor, the anticipation becomes almost physical. It curls around your ribs and settles in your chest. You watch athletes stretch in the sun, their movements slow and deliberate, as if they are powering up for feats no modern treadmill could prepare anyone for. They move with a kind of confidence that makes you reconsider every sports drink that ever claimed to be essential. The sand beneath their feet shifts with each motion, and you realize that this ground, uneven and stubborn, is part of their training. No soft synthetic track, no helpful bounce, only earth that judges every step. A group of trainers stands nearby, arms crossed, expression set to permanent unimpressed. One of them eyes you with a look that quietly suggests you would not survive 5 minutes in their warm-up. You imagine them waking up before dawn to chisel strength from discomfort, and suddenly you understand why those carved stone records have refused to budge for centuries. These people trained with nothing but grit, sun, and an alarming willingness to try techniques that would be illegal under at least 7 modern safety regulations. You walk farther into the heart of the stadium, and the noise swells. The crowd is growing, and every voice adds another layer to the atmosphere. You feel the weight of tradition here, heavy enough to shape posture, breath, even thoughts. This is not a place built for spectators. It is a furnace where athletes melt down fear and hammer it into something useful. You notice how everyone stands straighter the closer they get to the track, as if posture alone might improve their chances of witnessing history. As you take it all in, something clicks. These records never belong to a single athlete. They belong to this world, this sun, this dust, this stubborn landscape that forged bodies differently. Modern gear might make you faster, stronger, or more aerodynamic, but it cannot recreate a life spent wrestling with nature before breakfast. You breathe in the dry air and feel the grit on your tongue. And for a moment, you understand that breaking those records is not just about speed or strength. It is about stepping into a way of living that vanished long ago. One shaped by ritual, environment, and a deeper hunger for honor than any stopwatch can measure. You wander deeper into the stadium, and the ground beneath your feet shifts in a way that tells you this place has absolutely no interest in helping anyone run faster. The surface feels alive, a blend of packed earth and loose grains that slide just enough to make your balance question its life choices. You crouch down and sift the sand through your fingers. It clings to your skin, warm and stubborn, the kind of texture that reminds you this track predates modern convenience by many centuries. There is no rubbery spring to it, no carefully measured traction, only the honest promise that if you misstep, the earth will watch you fall and quietly judge you. The air itself feels different here. There is a thickness to it that carries heat straight into your lungs, as if every breath is a small workout. You look around and notice that even the breeze seems to move reluctantly, dragging itself across the stadium like it has errands it would rather be doing elsewhere. Every inhale tastes faintly of dust, olive groves, and the lingering presence of thousands of spectators who once stood exactly where you stand, shouting encouragement or arguing about who had the better discus technique. You take another breath and realize that modern climate control has ruined you more than you thought. As you walk toward the center of the field, the stadium's shape becomes more apparent. The long, narrow layout stretches out ahead, framed by sloping stone seats that seem perfectly designed to magnify the heat and bounce sound off every surface. You imagine sprinting the length of this place with the sun beating down on your shoulders and the noise from the crowd swelling into a tidal wave. The atmosphere alone would shave the confidence off most modern athletes. It is not just hot here, it is purposeful heat, the kind that feels like another competitor trying to slow you down. You pause near a group of athletes preparing the surface for training. They rake the sand with smooth wooden tools, not to level it but to stir it, fluff it, and make sure it retains just the right amount of unpredictability. One of them demonstrates a running start, feet digging deep before launching forward, and you realize how much strength is required simply to fight the terrain. On a modern track, the ground gives you energy back with every step. Here, the ground takes what it wants and returns only what you earn. Farther ahead, a pair of jumpers measure their practice marks, not with tape, but by pacing the distance the old-fashioned way. You watch one of them leap and land, feet sinking into the practice, sand with a satisfying thud that would send a modern coach into a lecture about injury prevention. The jumper stands, brushing dust from his knees, entirely unfazed, as if the ground is an old acquaintance who occasionally punches him in the shins for fun. The simplicity of the setup makes the performance even more impressive. There are no official boards, no neat white lines, only the raw dialogue between athlete and earth. You climb a few rows up the stone seating to get a wider view. The sun stretches shadows across the stadium floor, and you can almost hear echoes of past crowds rising up through the heat. You imagine the roar of thousands packed shoulder to shoulder, their excitement turning the air into something electric. Those athletes were not running in silence. They were sprinting through a storm of sound, dust swirling around their ankles, sweat stinging their eyes. Modern tracks might be cleaner and faster, but they cannot recreate the pressure of performing in a furnace, filled with people who believe victory is a sacred offering. As you look across the stadium one more time, the truth settles over you. These conditions did not merely challenge athletes, they shaped them. The terrain forced strength into their legs, The heat carved endurance into their lungs. The atmosphere sharpened their focus until every movement counted. You realize that breaking their records is not just about beating numbers. It is about stepping into an environment built to test more than muscle. It tests will, grit, and the ability to thrive in a place where the earth itself decides the terms. You step toward the training grounds, and the mood shifts the moment a group of trainers notices you. Their expressions sharpen with the kind of interest usually reserved for stray cats who wander into a lion enclosure. One of them tilts his head, taking you in from sandals to posture, and you can practically hear the unspoken thought floating above him. This one looks soft. Another trainer nudges his friend with the subtlety of a boulder rolling downhill, and they both look at you as if trying to decide whether you are here to watch or to collapse dramatically during warm-ups. The closest trainer steps forward. He has the kind of physique that suggests he wrestled a tree once and the tree apologized afterward. His voice carries the rough confidence of someone who has yelled instructions across hot fields for many years. He tells you to stand straighter, not because it will help your training, but because he cannot bear to look at whatever posture you walked in with. You straighten, mostly out of self-preservation, and he nods in satisfaction as though he has already improved you by at least 10%. He begins explaining their methods, and brutal feels like a polite understatement. There are no fancy machines, no digital timers, and certainly no comforting mats to land on. Instead, you learn that strength is built by lifting stones so heavy they probably have. To names. Endurance comes from running up dusty hills until your legs forget what sitting feels like. Speed is honed by sprinting barefoot across sand that seems to heat itself specifically to discourage hesitation. As he describes this, another trainer lifts a boulder the size of a stubborn goat and carries it across the yard without breaking stride. You try not to react, but your eyebrows betray you. The trainers exchange another look, this one even more amused. They explain that pain is not something to avoid here. It is a tutor, an impatient one, who insists on teaching lessons quickly and loudly. You watch as athletes move through drills that look deceptively simple. One group repeats short sprints, while a trainer shouts corrections about posture, breathing, and the importance of not running like a startled chicken. Another group practices jumps with halteres, swinging the weights with practiced rhythm before launching forward. Every landing sends a puff of dust into the air, and every attempt seems designed to coax power out of places most modern gyms ignore. One trainer invites you to try a warm-up, which you immediately suspect is a trap. He hands you a pair of halteres and demonstrates a movement that looks easy until you attempt it. The weights pull your arms down like mischievous gremlins determined to discourage ambition. You struggle to maintain balance, wondering how anyone uses these things without accidentally launching themselves sideways. The trainer watches with a thoughtful nod, the kind someone uses when evaluating livestock. He tells you that with a few years of practice, you might manage a passable jump. Possibly. They move on to endurance training and describe runs that start before sunrise, winding through rough paths that seem intentionally hostile. The goal is not merely to build stamina, but to teach the body to endure discomfort without complaint. You listen as they casually mention running through rain, wind, and the occasional goat encounter. Apparently, goats do not care about lanes or scheduling. The trainers shrug as if this is simply part of life. You begin to understand that modern tracks, with their smooth surfaces and lack of wildlife, feel almost embarrassingly gentle. One of the older trainers gestures toward a group practicing wrestling. Their movements are slow, controlled, and terrifyingly efficient. He explains how every athlete must know how to handle unpredictable forces, not just predictable drills. The emphasis is always on adaptability, on responding to whatever the world throws at you, even if it is another person trying to flip you into the dirt. You notice the athletes finish each round covered in dust and sweat, yet they rise with a determined spark that seems older than the stadium itself. By the time the trainers finish their explanations, you feel like you have glimpsed a philosophy disguised as exercise. This is not training built around comfort or convenience. It is training born from necessity, shaped by environment, and sharpened by a culture that believes strength is a form of honor. The trainers watch you one last time, still amused but faintly approving, as though you have passed the first test simply by surviving the introduction. You follow the athletes to a shaded courtyard where the scent of food hangs in the air with a confidence usually reserved for royalty. You expect a feast worthy of heroes, maybe something dramatic involving entire animals roasted on spits. Instead, you find bowls of olives, figs, barley bread, and something that looks suspiciously like a lump of cheese that has survived several historical eras. The athletes sit around these simple dishes with the kind of focus modern competitors reserve for protein bars that come in metallic wrappers. A trainer gestures for you to join them, and you lower yourself onto a bench that wobbles as though it is protesting your existence. The first thing you taste is the bread. It is dense, slightly coarse, and chews like it has been designed to remind you that carbohydrates once required commitment. You take another bite and notice a slow warmth spreading through your body, a grounded feeling that does not spike or crash but settles in like a long-term tenant. The athletes eat with a calm rhythm, tearing bread, popping olives into their mouths, sipping wine diluted with water. There is no rush, no calorie counting, no wrappers to crinkle, just fuel, chosen with the confidence of people who know exactly what their bodies can do. A younger athlete hands you a handful of figs, and you accept them with polite confusion. They look harmless enough, but the moment you bite into one, sweetness floods your mouth in a way that feels almost unfair. It hits with a burst of quick energy that lifts your mood and clears your thoughts, as if nature tucked a lightning bolt inside soft fruit. You suddenly understand why these people run, jump, and wrestle half naked in the sun without needing a flavored energy gel squeezed from a plastic tube. Nearby, a large pot simmers over a small fire. A trainer stirs it with a wooden ladle the size of a small oar. He tells you it is a basic stew of legumes and herbs, something athletes eat daily. You taste it and find it simple, earthy, comforting, and far more satisfying than you expect. It is not designed to dazzle your taste buds. It is designed to strengthen you quietly, steadily, in a way that feels almost conspiratorial. You feel your stomach warm, your limbs loosen, and a slow current of energy begin forming under your skin. One athlete explains how they eat throughout the day, not in rigid schedules but in response to the demands of training. Their meals are split, adaptable, and rooted in instinct honed by years of discipline. You notice how none of them seem weighed down or overly full. Instead, there is a balanced steadiness to their movements, as if every ingredient has been chosen to keep the body in harmonious cooperation with the punishing routines you witnessed earlier. You begin to see the logic. Their diet is not about maximizing muscle growth or crafting aesthetic perfection. It is about longevity, resilience, and sustaining the harsh realities of their environment. Across the courtyard, a group is crushing olives to make oil. Their hands move with practiced ease, and the smell drifts toward you, rich and slightly peppery. A trainer pours a small amount over your bread, and the flavor changes entirely. It becomes smoother, deeper, almost luxurious. You watch the athletes drizzle oil on nearly everything, and you realize that this single ingredient fuels much of their endurance. It is pure, abundant, and dense with energy that burns slowly through hours of exertion. As the meal continues, you notice something even more striking. There is no obsession here, no anxiety over whether they are eating the right amount of protein or the perfect ratio of nutrients. They trust the food because it comes directly from the world they train in. Their diet is inseparable from the land, the climate, and the pace of life that shapes them. You take another bite of bread and feel a connection to this place settle deeper. It becomes clear that the strength of ancient athletes is not just forged in training pits or stadiums. It begins here, in simple foods that carry the sun, soil, and labor of the world around them. You feel the quiet power of that simplicity as it spreads through your body, A reminder that sometimes the most unassuming ingredients build the most enduring strength. You wake before the sun because someone shakes your shoulder with the insistence of a man who believes sleep is a moral weakness. The sky is still dark, a deep blue that feels too early to belong to anyone, and for a moment you consider pretending to be unconscious. But the courtyard is already filling with athletes stretching, yawning, and moving with the sluggish determination of people who do this every single day. You pull yourself to your feet and follow them into the cooling pre-dawn air, trying not to think about how your body forgot what waking up this early feels like. The world is quiet, almost reverent. The only sounds come from soft footsteps on stone, the rustle of tunics, and the distant conversation of birds who seem delighted that humans have chosen to join them at such an unreasonable hour. A faint line of light rests on the horizon, hinting that the sun is preparing to make an entrance but is not in any rush. The athletes begin their warm-ups with slow, deliberate movements. Their shoulders roll, their arms sweep wide, and you mimic them, hoping no one notices how stiff you are. They are not rushing to get ready. They are easing themselves into a rhythm that seems older than the stadium itself. One of the trainers walks through the group, correcting postures with gentle taps or sharp looks, depending on the situation. He adjusts your stance with a quick gesture, nudging your feet into alignment as if he is tuning an instrument. You feel the difference immediately, subtle but grounding, as though your body has been slightly out of key all your life and only now finds its proper pitch. He nods once and moves on, leaving you with the quiet satisfaction of not being the weakest link for at least one moment. The stretching shifts into a flowing sequence that looks almost like a dance. You begin to realize this is not merely warming up muscles. It is a ritual, practiced and repeated until it becomes something between prayer and preparation. Each athlete moves with intention, eyes half-lidded, breaths deep and slow. You follow, and as your muscles loosen and your lungs open to the cool air, you sense the invisible thread connecting everyone here. It is discipline woven with tradition, a reminder that they are not just training their bodies but honoring the countless mornings that came before this one. The sun finally pushes a pale glow into the sky as the group transitions into short runs around the courtyard. The ground feels colder beneath your feet, and the chill wakes something inside you. The athletes glide through the dim light. With the ease of people who have done this so many times, their bodies anticipate every shift of weight. You try to keep pace, but your footsteps sound louder, less graceful, as if the earth is commenting on your technique, yet no one laughs. The only measure here is effort, not elegance. As the sky brightens, the warm-ups grow more intense. Athletes begin striking the ground with increasing force, testing their legs, testing the day. A few pair off and practice quick grapples, their movements still controlled but sharper now. You watch them and sense the underlying pulse of anticipation running through the entire group. These are not aimless drills. They are the continuation of a lineage, the way every athlete here connects to ancestors who trained by the same light, breathed the same air, and sought to become something greater in the same ancient dirt. A trainer calls for everyone to halt. The athletes stand in a loose circle as he speaks, his voice low but firm. It is not a pep talk. It is a reminder. He talks about duty, about honoring oneself through discipline, about how strength begins long before the first race or match. The athletes listen in stillness, heads bowed slightly, not in submission but in respect. You feel the weight of his words settle into your chest, warm and steady, and you understand that these pre-dawn rituals shape more than muscle. They shape identity. When the sun finally breaks over the horizon, lighting the courtyard in soft gold, the warm-up ends. The athletes move into the day with a purpose you can almost feel brushing against your skin. You stand among them, breathing harder than you expected, yet somehow calmer. You realize that what happens here each morning is not just preparation for competition. It is the quiet forging of spirit, repeated until it becomes unshakable. You step into the stadium again, but this time the air feels different. It hums with a raw tension that settles on your skin like fine dust. The stands are filling quickly, people squeezing together on stone benches with an eagerness that borders on impatience. You feel their anticipation ripple outward, weaving itself through the crowd until it reaches the athletes gathered at the edge of the field. Their faces are calm, almost serene, but you can see the flicker of nerves beneath the surface, a small tightening of the jaw or a lingering breath held just a moment too long. The announcer's voice cuts through the noise, low and rhythmic, each word carrying the weight of tradition. The athletes step forward, and the crowd responds with a rising hum, not quite cheering yet, more like an exhale they have been holding on to for hours. You watch the runners line up, their toes digging into the sand, their bodies angled like spring-loaded traps. There are no medals shining around the stadium, no podiums glinting in the S. There is only the promise of something far older: honor, glory, the kind of recognition that does not get hung on a shelf, but carved into memory and stone. As the runners prepare, you feel something shift in the atmosphere. It is heavier now, almost dense, and you realize the stakes here are not defined by prizes. Everything revolves around reputation, lineage, and pride in a way modern competitions rarely capture. These athletes are not running for personal bests or endorsements. They are running for their city, their family, their own self-worth forged under the gaze of thousands. The pressure is not loud, but it is absolute. The signal to start snaps through the air, and the runners launch forward with explosive force. The sand erupts beneath their feet, and for a moment the stadium seems to tilt with their momentum. You watch their faces contort with effort, each stride driven by something deeper than the desire to win. They push themselves as though the earth is chasing them, as if stopping would betray everything they stand for. The crowd roars now, voices rising and falling like waves crashing onto a shore. You feel your heartbeat trying to match the rhythm of their feet pounding the ground. When the race ends, the victor lifts his arms, not in celebration but in acknowledgement, almost solemn. The crowd erupts into applause that feels more like worship. You look at the defeated runners and expect disappointment, maybe frustration. Instead, you see something quieter. They are winded, flushed, drenched in sweat, but their eyes hold steadiness. They competed with everything they had, and in this place, that is its own kind of victory. You sense how pride functions differently here. It does not crumble under loss. It transforms, sharpens, urges them to return stronger. The next event brings wrestlers to the center of the field. They circle each other with measured steps, muscles coiled and ready. You sense the seriousness in their stances, the silent promise that neither will give an inch easily. When they clash, it is with a force that shakes the ground, and you wince even from a distance. The crowd reacts instantly, gasping, shouting advice, offering emotional support, as if they are all personally invested in the outcome. In a way, they are. A city's pride can rest on a single match. You feel the gravity of it all pulling you in. It is intoxicating, this blend of tradition and expectation. The athletes carry themselves with a certainty that comes from knowing their performance will be talked about for years, maybe decades, maybe longer. A medal could tarnish or be forgotten in a drawer. But honor earned here is something carved into marble or whispered through generations. As the sun climbs higher and the competitions continue, you understand that the pressure shaping these athletes is not a burden, but a forge. It does not crush them, it tempers them. It turns effort into legacy. And as you watch the next group step forward, faces set with quiet determination, you realize that this intensity is exactly why those ancient records refuse to fall. You take your place along the edge of the track as the sprinters step forward, each one shaking out their limbs with a confidence that borders on defiance. The ground beneath them looks more like the world's longest sandbox than a proper track, uneven patches shifting with every breeze. You half expect someone to pull out a rake and apologize for the state of things, but the athletes seem perfectly at home. They dig their toes into the sand as if it is an old friend who occasionally betrays them, but never without warning. The runners lower themselves into their starting positions, and immediately you notice the difference. There is no sleek crouch or carefully measured stance. Their posture resembles a coiled spring that has been wound by nature rather than engineering. Their fingers press into the earth, feeling for firmness, searching for a patch that will not crumble beneath them. You see their calves tense, muscles pulling tight with anticipation, and for a moment you wonder how anyone can sprint full speed on terrain that shifts underfoot like a living thing. When the start signal cracks through the air, the runners explode outward with a burst so sudden it feels like the stadium gasps with you. They do not glide. They attack the ground, every step aggressive and deliberate. Their feet strike at angles modern coaches would consider a cry for help. But here it works. Their strides adjust instinctively, shifting to counter dips and soft patches, each movement a negotiation between body and landscape. The sand sprays up in arcs behind them, catching the morning light as they charge forward. You watch their mechanics transform with every stride. Their upper bodies lean slightly forward, not for aerodynamics, but to keep momentum pulling them ahead before the ground can steal it away. Their arms swing wider, carving the air with surprising power, helping them stabilize when the earth betrays their footing. Their knees lift higher than you expect, as if trying to outrun the very surface trying to drag them down. It is messy, wild, and strangely beautiful, a reminder that efficiency can look entirely different when the world under you refuses to cooperate. A runner stumbles for half a heartbeat, his foot sinking deeper than expected, but instead of faltering, he redirects the force, twisting his torso, recovering in a fluid motion that would snap the ankles of anyone pampered by modern tracks. The crowd reacts not with shock, but with admiration, shouting encouragement as he accelerates again. You realize these sprinters are not fighting for perfect form. They are adapting, constantly recalculating, reading the ground with the sensitivity of seasoned trackers. By the halfway mark, their breathing grows louder, sharp bursts slicing through the air in sync with their pounding. Footsteps. Sweat flicks off their brows in tiny arcs. The dust clings to their legs in streaks, but their focus does not waver. They look less like athletes in a controlled event and more like hunters chasing prey across open terrain. The unpredictability of the ground becomes a partner rather than an obstacle, shaping their speed and rhythm in ways no modern facility ever could. As they near the finish, the energy intensifies. Their strides stretch longer, each one a dare thrown at the earth. You feel the power of their acceleration ripple through the crowd, pulling you forward as if your body wants to run with them. When the first sprinter crosses the line, he does not slow gracefully. He stumbles, recovers, and comes to a dusty, triumphant halt. The others follow, chests heaving, hands resting on their knees as they gulp down air warmed by effort and S. The trainers approach, offering quick evaluations and nods of approval. None of them mention form or technique. They talk instead about reading the ground, trusting instinct, and using the terrain's resistance to build strength. You realize modern sprinters train on surfaces designed to help them. These athletes train on surfaces designed to challenge them. The ground is not just part of the race, it is part of the athlete. As you watch the sprinters straighten and wipe dust from their legs, it becomes clear why their speed carries a different kind of intensity. Running here demands adaptation, power, and resilience in every stride. It is a fight against the earth itself, and somehow, the earth never quite wins. You stand near the long jump pit, staring at the sand like it has personally offended you. The athletes around you grip their halteres with casual familiarity, the stone weights hanging from their hands like extensions of their own bodies. You, on the other hand, hold your pair with the stiff, confused posture of someone who has accidentally picked up two sleeping animals and has no idea what to do next. A trainer notices your uncertainty and raises an eyebrow, the kind of expression that says he has already predicted your performance and adjusted his expectations accordingly. He signals for you to watch the athletes first. One of them steps to the line, halteres dangling at his sides, shoulders loose. He begins his run with long, steady strides, building momentum as the weights swing rhythmically. There is a strange grace to it, as if the halteres guide his timing rather than hinder it. When he reaches the edge of the pit, he hurls his arms forward with a powerful snap. The weights pull his upper body ahead, lifting him into the air in a way that seems to defy the usual laws of gravity. He lands far down the track, sand erupting around his feet, and rises without drama, as if flights like that are his standard mode of transportation. You feel something shift inside you: curiosity, intrigue, maybe a touch of panic. The trainer gestures for you to take your place. You walk to the plan, starting line, the halteres dragging at your hands with an impatient heaviness, as if they want to remind you that this jump is not going to be gentle. You take a breath and begin your approach, trying to match the rhythm you saw. The weights swing, but your timing feels a little off, like you are conducting an orchestra that refuses to listen. As you accelerate, the halteres feel less like burdens and more like anchors guiding your momentum. Your steps grow bolder, though your brain still screams warnings about the rapidly approaching edge of the pit. The trainer watches with folded arms, waiting to see if you will leap or simply fall forward out of self-preservation. At the last moment, you channel every scrap of courage you can gather. Swing your arms forward and jump. For a heartbeat, you feel weightless. The halteres pull you into a longer arc than you expect, stretching your flight through the air. Your stomach drops and your legs flail in a surprisingly unheroic fashion. But the power is undeniable. You travel much farther than your instincts predicted, and the shock of the sensation momentarily wipes your thoughts clean. Then gravity remembers you exist and brings you down in a decidedly less graceful landing, sending sand spraying in all directions. You stumble, fall to one knee, and try to look like you absolutely meant to do that. The athletes nod with mild approval, which feels like the highest compliment you could hope for. The trainer approaches, his expression a mixture of amusement and genuine evaluation. He explains how the halteres create a counterbalance, how the swing of the arms turns into extra lift, and how those who master the timing can stretch their jumps beyond what their legs alone can produce. You listen, still catching your breath, realizing that this ancient technique is less a trick and more an ingenious partnership between weight and motion. You try again, this time focusing on the rhythm more than the landing. Your strides grow, smoother, the halteres tugging your arms forward in a steady pattern. When you jump, the lift feels cleaner, your flight more controlled. You still land with the grace of someone learning to walk on ice, but there is progress. The trainer's nod is slightly less amused now, which you decide is a victory. As you stand brushing sand from your legs, you understand how ancient athletes achieved such staggering distances. It was not simply strength or speed. It was technique shaped by tools that forced the body to move differently, to engage muscles modern training hardly touches. The halteres unlock potential hidden beneath instinct, stretching the limits of what the human body can do when rhythm, physics, and courage align. You look down at the weights in your hands, feeling their solid, reassuring pull. For the first time, you sense how this simple tool transformed the long jump into something far more ambitious than a leap. It became a negotiation with the air itself, and on days when everything aligned, the air sometimes agreed. You follow the distance runners toward a long, sun-baked track that loops around the stadium like a heated necklace. The morning warmth has settled into something heavier now, pressing against your skin with the confidence of a creature marking its territory. The runners gather in a loose cluster, their expressions calm in a way that makes you suspicious. Anyone preparing to run this far in this heat should at least look mildly concerned. Instead, they stretch lazily, chatting as if they are about to take a scenic stroll rather than test the limits of human endurance. A trainer gestures for you to observe them closely. He explains that distance running here is less about speed and more about mastering the dance between body, heat, and breath. The runners take their places, not in strict lines but spaced naturally, giving each other room to move without the elbows and jostling you expect from modern races. The crowd is already gathering, filling the air with murmurs, shouts, and the occasional argument about who has the superior stride. You feel the energy rising like heat from the track. When the runners start, their pace seems deceptively slow. Their feet glide across the ground with soft, steady crunches, and for a moment you wonder if this is some sort of warm-up lap. But as they settle into their rhythm, you notice how their bodies begin to align with the terrain and temperature. Their shoulders drop, their arms sway in smooth arcs, and their breath falls into a pattern that sounds almost musical. You try to imitate it under your breath and nearly choke, earning a raised eyebrow from a nearby trainer. One runner passes close enough for you to hear the strange cadence of his breathing. It comes in short bursts, followed by a long, controlled exhale, as if he is releasing heat rather than air. Another uses a pattern that alternates between nose and mouth, matching each shift with his footfalls in a practiced sequence. The trainer explains that these methods help regulate temperature, conserve energy, and keep the body from overheating. You watch their chests rise and fall like bellows, steady and relentless. The heat intensifies with every lap. The sun climbs higher, reflecting off the sand until the entire track seems to shimmer. You expect the runners to slow or falter, but instead, something curious happens. They begin inhaling deeper through their noses, holding the breath just slightly longer before releasing it in a steady stream. Their faces relax, their jaws unclench, and their strides stretch a little farther. It is as if they are drawing calmness from thin air and letting it trickle through their bodies one breath at a time. A few runners break away from the pack, not with sudden surges of speed, but with gradual widening of their stride. They look like they are drifting rather than pushing, carried forward by a balance they have cultivated over years. The crowd reacts in rolling waves of noise, each cheer bouncing across the stadium and landing on the runners with invisible force. You can see how the attention fuels them, how the presence of so many eyes becomes part of the rhythm they maintain. You try jogging alongside the trainer for a few steps, attempting one of the breathing patterns he demonstrates. It feels unnatural at first. Your inhale comes too quickly, your exhale stutters, and your body reacts with a mild sense of betrayal. But after a few tries, something clicks. The breath slips into a smoother cycle, and for a brief moment, you understand what the runners feel. It is like finding a hidden gear inside your chest, one that turns effort into something more manageable. Further along the track, a runner suddenly accelerates, surprising both you and the crowd. His breath shifts into a new pattern with sharp, controlled inhales, the kind that sound almost like a quiet chant. His arms pump harder, but his face stays relaxed, focused only on the path ahead. He passes his competitors one by one, not with dramatic flair, but with the steady certainty of someone who has spent years learning exactly when to unleash each reserve of energy. When the race ends, the runners gather near a shaded area, breathing hard but steady. Their chests rise and fall in deep, controlled waves, as if the run has not exhausted them but refined them. Sweat drips from their brows, yet their eyes shine with quiet satisfaction. They speak to each other in low tones, discussing pacing choices and the strange way the wind shifted halfway through the race. You realize that for them, distance running is not simply endurance. It is strategy, patience, and the mastery of breath as a tool rather than a reflex. As you watch them recover, their breathing gradually returning to calm regularity, you feel a new appreciation settling in. These runners do not fight the heat or the distance. They partner with it, adjusting their breath until their bodies move with a rhythm that seems almost ancient. And in that rhythm, You sense the secret behind their remarkable endurance, one forged not through modern science, but through centuries of quiet, intentional practice. You stand near a clearing behind the stadium where the discus throwers gather, each of them holding a disc that looks deceptively harmless from a distance. Up close, you feel its weight when a trainer hands one to you, and your arm immediately sinks lower than you intended, as if the discus has personally decided to expose your upper body strength or lack of it. The stone feels cool and smooth, with edges worn by countless hands over centuries, and it carries a presence that makes modern equipment seem a little theatrical by comparison. The throwers warm up by swinging their arms in wide arcs, rotating their bodies with a fluidity that makes you wonder if they were born spinning. Their motions are precise but unhurried, a slow gathering of potential energy. When one of them steps into the throwing circle, the entire field seems to pause. His toes grip the ground, knees slightly bent, torso coiled like a bowstring. The trainer nudges you closer, telling you to watch not just the movement but the intention behind it. You try to look focused, though your attention keeps drifting to the discus in your hand, which feels like it is quietly judging you for every athletic decision you have ever made. The athlete begins his rotation, and the change is immediate. His movements blur into a spiraling motion that makes you take a half step back. The discus arcs through the air, slicing upward with a clean, effortless whistle. It glides farther than seems reasonable, landing deep in the field with a thud that echoes in your chest. You stare at the distance in disbelief, because if someone did that today, a committee would call an emergency meeting to inspect the equipment. But the trainer only shrugs, as if to say this is business as usual. He explains that the ancient discus is not engineered for safety or convenience. Its weight distribution forces the thrower to rely on technique rather than brute strength. The shape requires the right velocity, the right angle, and a smooth release. You study it more closely, running your fingers along the curved surface. It feels strangely balanced, almost alive with potential when held correctly. But when your grip is even slightly off, it becomes awkward and stubborn, refusing to cooperate. You suspect the discus can sense fear. Another thrower steps up. This one is taller, with a stance that suggests he is about to negotiate with the laws of physics. His rotation is slower at first, then accelerates in a controlled whirl that makes the air ripple. The release is sharp, almost delicate, and the discus rises in a clean, spiraling climb before descending in a long arc that leaves onlookers murmuring in appreciation. The trainer points out subtle differences between the throws, highlighting the shift of weight in the hips, the snap of the wrist, the precise moment the discus leaves the fingertips. It becomes clear that distance is earned through mastery rather than mere power. You attempt a few practice swings, trying to mimic the movements you observed. The first rotation sends you off balance, forcing you to plant your foot before you spin yourself into an unplanned nap in the dirt. The trainer adjusts your stance, loosening your shoulders, repositioning your grip until the discus settles more comfortably in your palm. You try again, this time slower, more deliberate. The rotation feels smoother, the weight of the discus guiding your arm in a surprising way. When you finally release it, the throw travels farther than you expect, though still nowhere near the marks left by the athletes. Even so, the sensation of the discus leaving your hand carries a thrill that lingers in your fingertips. As you watch more throws, you notice how each athlete brings a different rhythm to the movement. Some spin with measured patience, others with explosive force, but all share an unspoken understanding with the discus. It is a dialogue between motion and air, between strength and timing, between intention and release. Modern analysts might study angles and momentum, but standing here, you realize that ancient distance comes from something far more intricate. It is the merging of physical skill with an intuitive reading of the object itself. The trainer rests a hand on your shoulder, nodding toward the field marked with impressive throws. There is pride in his eyes, not for a single athlete, but for the craft. You look out at the scattered discs resting in the dust. each one a testament to a technique so refined it still leaves experts puzzled. And as you stand there, the weight of the discus still tingling in your grip, you understand how these ancient athletes carved distances into history that modern science struggles to explain. You walk toward the field where the javelin throwers train, expecting something straightforward, maybe even familiar. A long spear. Someone throws it. It flies. Everyone claps. But the moment you see the athletes handling their javelins, you realize you have made several incorrect assumptions. These are not simple spears. They are long, elegant shafts that seem almost too light for their size, humming faintly as the athletes rotate them in slow circles. The wood catches the sunlight with a quiet shimmer, and you get the sense that whoever crafted these had opinions about aerodynamics long before anyone invented charts or diagrams. A trainer hands you one, and the first thing you notice is the balance. The javelin rests in your palm as if it has been waiting for you, its weight distributed with almost eerie precision. When you shift your grip even slightly, the entire thing tilts in protest, like a cat refusing to settle unless you hold it exactly the right way. The trainer smirks as you adjust it 4 times before giving up and pretending you meant to hold it incorrectly in the first place. The throwers begin their drills, moving through warm-ups with long, sweeping strides. They carry the javelins tucked under their arms, the tips pointed forward like the snouts of slender, impatient creatures. When they reach the throwing line, something subtle changes in their demeanor. Their posture straightens, their steps lighten, and their eyes narrow with the focus of hunters surveying distant prey. One runner begins his approach, legs pumping in a rhythm that builds speed without sacrificing control. Halfway down the lane, he shifts the javelin into position with a fluid motion that looks practiced enough to be instinct. Then he throws. The javelin leaves his hand with a flick so precise you almost miss the technique behind it. The spear arcs upward in a perfect curve, spinning with a controlled rotation that keeps its flight stable. You watch it sail so far across the field that you briefly question whether the laws of physics were fully formed in ancient Greece. The crowd of athletes murmurs in approval as it lands with a deep, satisfying thud, far beyond where you expected it to fall. The trainer explains what modern analysts often misunderstand. The ancient javelins were crafted with specific tapering that allowed air to flow along the shaft in a way that modern replicas do not fully capture. The throwers knew to release with just enough spin to stabilize the weapon, but not so much that it wobbled or slowed. They understood wind direction instinctively, adjusting their run-up angle by watching the movement of leaves or dust in the air. These tricks were rarely written down, passed instead from mentor to pupil in long lines of tradition that faded over centuries. Another athlete steps forward, this one with a calmer approach. His grip is higher, fingers spread delicately along the shaft. He runs with steady, measured steps, almost casual, and when he throws, the motion looks almost gentle, but the javelin cuts through the air with shocking speed, rising in a clean, sharp path before leveling into a long, gliding flight. It stays aloft so long you wonder if it will ever come down. When it finally lands, the trainer nods approvingly, pointing out that this athlete used a technique relying on lift rather than pure force, manipulating the angle just enough to let the air carry the javelin farther. You try a few practice motions, holding the javelin above your shoulder. The balance challenges you, pulling slightly forward as if eager to escape your grip. You attempt a gentle toss with no running start, and it travels a modest distance before nosediving in a humbling fashion. The trainer chuckles but helps you adjust your stance, repositioning your fingers and guiding your elbow higher. You try again, this time with a small step, and though the throw is still unimpressive, you feel the javelin fly straighter, the air catching it for a brief moment before gravity reclaims it. As more athletes take their turns, you notice each one has a personal relationship with the javelin. Some throw with explosive force, relying on speed and aggression. Others approach with calm precision, as though coaxing the spear into cooperation. Each technique seems tailored to the thrower's build, rhythm, and familiarity with the winds drifting across the field. You begin to understand why modern analysts struggle to recreate these ancient feats. They study the numbers, but the athletes here study the air itself. When training ends, the javelins lie scattered across the field like sleeping arrows, each one having traced a different story across the sky. You look at them with newfound appreciation, realizing that these wooden spears once carried secrets now nearly forgotten. Secrets held in the flick of a wrist, the angle of a run, the whisper of wind across a tapered shaft. And for a moment, you can almost see the distances these ancient athletes once reached, distances so impressive that even today, people stare at the records and wonder how they ever happened. You follow the wrestlers down a narrow path behind the stadium, the ground sloping into a series of shallow pits filled with soft earth. The air here smells different, heavy with dust and sweat and something faintly metallic, as if the soil itself remembers every struggle that has ever taken place in it. The men ahead of you move with the lazy confidence of lions wandering toward a familiar den. Their shoulders are broad, their backs carved with the kind of strength that does not come from clean repetitions in a gym, but from years spent hauling, lifting, pulling, and grinding through physical labor, day after day. One of them notices you hovering near the edge and grins, a slow, amused stretch of his mouth that makes you wonder if you have accidentally volunteered yourself as a warm-up exercise. He gestures for you to come closer. You step into the pit and immediately feel the earth shift under your feet, soft enough to absorb weight, yet firm enough to anchor movement. The wrestlers circle each other with playful shoves, laughing in a way that is only slightly threatening. Their muscles ripple in patterns that look less like anatomy and more like topography. A trainer explains that the strength these men carry is born long before they ever step into a pit. They work fields, build structures, and transport goods with their own hands, so every muscle they use in a match is one they use in their daily lives. You watch as two wrestlers square off. Their stance is casual at first, then something changes. Their bodies lower, their expressions sharpen, and their hands reach forward with the slow, deliberate intention of predators preparing to pounce. When they clash, the force of it sends a puff of dust spiraling upward. You feel the impact in your chest, even from a distance. Their bodies lock, each one testing the other with small shifts of weight, sudden bursts of power, and clever adjustments that keep the momentum alive. There is nothing theatrical about their movements. Everything is efficient and purposeful, each action stripping away whatever does not contribute to control. Their feet dig into the soil, calves flexing as they pivot, push, and counter with strength that feels both raw and precise. You expect a match like this to end quickly, but the struggle stretches on. Neither man gives an inch easily. Sweat drips from their brows, streaking down their arms and catching in the dirt smeared across their skin. Their breaths grow louder, punctuated by small grunts and the soft thud of feet shifting for better leverage. One wrestler attempts a shoulder throw, lifting his opponent off the ground with alarming ease, but the other twists mid-air and lands on his feet, using the momentum to push forward again. You stand there, mouth slightly open, wondering if they rehearse that or if gravity simply negotiates differently with people built like this. As they break apart and reset, the trainer nudges you toward the center. You shake your head quickly, but he insists, assuring you that they will go easy. The wrestlers grin in a way that makes you doubtful, but you step forward anyway, feeling the earth give just a little under your weight. One of them approaches you slowly, adjusting his stance to match your height. His grip, when he takes your arm, is surprisingly gentle, yet you can sense the power simmering beneath it, a strength that feels like it could lift an ox cart without interrupting a conversation. He shows you a few basic holds, guiding your movements with patience. You try to mimic his stance, planting your feet, lowering your center of gravity, preparing to push. The instant you apply pressure, he demonstrates exactly how much stronger he is. It is not a shove or a violent motion. It is more like he redirects your energy the way a river nudges a leaf downstream. You stumble in a half circle, your balance dissolving faster than your pride, and he catches your elbow to steady you before you topple. The wrestlers laugh, not unkindly, and return to their training with renewed intensity. You step back to the edge and watch as pairs rotate through holds, grapples, and throws. Their movements grow faster, their bodies slamming into the earth with dull thuds that send tremors up your legs. Dust rises around them in swirling clouds, making the entire scene feel ancient and primal, as if no time has passed since the first people discovered strength could be tested this way. You realize that these men do not train strength, they sharpen it. Their bodies carry the memory of every physical task they have ever done, each one layering more power onto their frame. It is strength shaped by survival, necessity, and tradition, and when they wrestle, all of that history emerges in every motion. Watching them, you understand how their power once dominated the ancient games so completely that their feats still seem impossible today. And in that dusty pit, surrounded by laughter, sweat, and the soft crunch of shifting earth, you feel the weight of that truth settle deep inside you. You spend the morning wandering through the settlements surrounding Olympia, and very quickly you realize something unsettling. No one here ever seems still. Not the merchants rearranging goods for the 5th time without a single customer in sight. Not the farmers hauling baskets that look heavy enough to sprain your future descendants. Not even the elderly, who move with a steady determination that makes you question every elevator ride you have ever taken. The entire community pulses with motion, as if the idea of staying still too long might invite trouble from the gods. You trail behind a group of women carrying amphorae filled with water, each vessel balanced effortlessly on a shoulder. The containers look heavy enough to turn your spine into a decorative spiral. Yet they walk with the ease of people who have done this since childhood. Their steps are long and confident, adjusting automatically to the uneven pathways. You try mimicking their posture, shifting your weight forward as you walk, and immediately catch your toe on a rock, nearly sending yourself into an unplanned dive toward a goat that was minding its own business. A nearby girl laughs, not unkindly, and shows you the proper rhythm. The movement feels strange, but gradually settles into something almost natural, though you still refuse to make eye contact with the goat. Further ahead, a group of boys plays a game that involves sprinting, jumping, and occasionally tumbling through dust with the enthusiasm of puppies discovering gravity. What surprises you most is how effortlessly they blend agility with strength. They leap over obstacles without slowing down, change direction with explosive bursts, and tackle each other with a speed that suggests bones here are made of something sturdier than yours. Their shouts echo through the street, full of the kind of joy that comes from using a body that has never known boredom or stillness. You pause near a man carrying a wooden beam across his shoulders, his muscles shifting like ropes beneath the skin. He is not training. He is simply doing his job. Yet the effort builds the same power athletes try to create today with entire gyms full of expensive equipment. You watch him hoist the beam onto a structure, his movements practiced and efficient. A trainer standing nearby points out that tasks like this are not occasional challenges. They are daily routines. The people here build, lift, drag, knead, carry, gather, and walk for most of their waking hours. Strength is not a pursuit, it is a byproduct of existing. As you continue exploring, you notice patterns repeating everywhere. No one rushes, yet no one idles. Movement flows naturally through every activity, from kneading dough with forearms that could crush walnuts, to sharpening tools with a rhythm that keeps shoulders and backs quietly engaged. Even mundane tasks like sweeping floors become full-body actions, with wide arcs that work the core in ways modern fitness influencers would proudly monetize. You follow a shepherd heading uphill with a flock clustered around him. The climb is steep enough to make your calves tremble, but he moves as if the ground beneath him slopes in his favor. His steps never falter, even while navigating loose stones. You try keeping pace and quickly realize that your legs are protesting loudly enough to deserve their own festival. The shepherd glances back, amused, and tells you that walking miles each day builds endurance more effectively than any planned workout. His remark triggers an uncomfortable memory of paying for a gym membership you barely used. Back near the stadium, you watch a few athletes finishing their chores before training. One hauls water, another stacks wooden crates, a third helps rebuild part of a fence. These tasks blend seamlessly into their athletic preparation, layering strength and mobility until their bodies feel carved more than trained. Even when they rest, it is only briefly, as if pausing too long might cause muscles to soften in protest. You finally sit on a stone bench, tired from a morning of simply observing. Your legs ache, your shoulders complain, and your breath comes faster than you would ever admit. Yet the people moving around you look energized, not exhausted, carrying the natural vitality of those whose bodies have been shaped by a lifetime of physical engagement rather than sporadic attempts at fitness. As you watch them flow through their routines, the truth settles into you with quiet certainty. Athleticism here is not built in bursts of effort. It is woven into every moment of living. The ancient world produces athletes not by special training alone, but by a culture where movement is as constant as breathing. And for the first time, you understand why their records still stand like unshakable monuments. Their entire lives were the warm-up. You wander into a clearing just outside the settlement where children gather after chores, and immediately you feel the pulse of a world that does not wait for adulthood to teach a body how to move. The ground is uneven, dotted with stones and patches of dry grass, but no one seems bothered by it. The children burst across the space in a blur of limbs, laughter, and abrupt changes in direction that would put professional sprinters in physical therapy. The moment they notice you, they slow only long enough to size you up, the way small predators assess whether you are a threat or simply a new spectator who might soon get roped into a game. One group plays a running contest that looks simple until you watch more closely. They sprint in zigzags, dodging each other, swiveling their hips, folding their bodies into quick turns that make you dizzy. Their feet grip the ground instinctively, adjusting to dips and divots without a second thought. A girl no taller than your waist darts across their path, leaps over a fallen branch, and lands with perfect balance, her posture steady and proud. She grins at you as if daring you to try the same. You smile back in the strained way someone does when their joints are already negotiating surrender. Nearby, a group wrestles in the dirt with the same energy you saw in the training pits, only shrunk into smaller bodies. Their movements are chaotic, but reveal an early understanding of leverage and momentum. One boy wraps his arms around another's waist, attempting a lift that looks too ambitious. But with a twist of his hips and a shift of his weight, he sends his friend tumbling backward into the dust. They both burst into laughter before rolling to their feet, with the kind of ease that comes from falling 100 times without anyone rushing to cushion the impact. You find yourself envying their cartilage. A game of throwing stones soon catches your eye. The children compete to see who can toss theirs the farthest. But what fascinates you is the technique. They do not simply fling the stones. They wind up with fluid arcs, rotating their shoulders and stepping into the throw with form that looks uncannily similar to the discus athletes you watched earlier. A boy demonstrates a motion that sends his stone flying far beyond the others, and the group cheers as if he just set a new world record. The trainer standing beside you tells you these games mimic the movements. Adults practice, teaching coordination long before any formal training begins. Another group balances on a fallen log, taking turns nudging each other with playful pushes meant to test stability. They twist and counter, shifting their weight with instinctive precision. When one child loses balance and falls, the others shout in triumph. But they also help him back up without hesitation. They begin again, repeating the movements until their bodies memorize each tiny adjustment needed to stay upright. Watching them, you realize they are rehearsing the first lessons of footwork, balance, and timing, all disguised as fun. A group of older children constructs an obstacle course using whatever they can find. They arrange rocks, branches, and carved sticks, then race through it with incredible coordination. They jump, duck, pivot, and contort themselves around obstacles in fluid sequences that make you wonder if you stumbled into an early boot camp for future Olympians. Their bodies move with rhythm and power, each motion blending into the next without hesitation. You try one section yourself and immediately catch your foot on a root, nearly pitching forward before a girl steadies you with one hand. She giggles and guides you through the proper steps, moving with grace so natural it borders on art. The trainer approaches and explains that these childhood games are not just pastimes. They are the foundation of lifelong athleticism. Children here grow up learning how to fall safely, how to distribute weight, how to generate power through rotation, and how to navigate uneven terrain with confidence. Their bodies develop strength and agility long before discipline enters the picture. Every sprint, jump, tumble, and climb builds skills that adults spend years trying to cultivate through training programs. As the sun dips lower, the children gather to play one final game, a mix of chase and strategy that weaves through the clearing in a wild, joyful tangle. Their movements are so fluid, so deceptively complex, that you understand a truth the modern world often forgets. These children are not practicing to become athletic. They already are. The games sculpt their bodies in the same way time shapes stone, layer by layer, movement by movement. Watching them, you understand why the ancient athletes grew into such formidable competitors. Their training did not start when they reached adulthood. It began here, in dusty clearings filled with laughter and daring leaps, where play quietly transformed into power. You follow the athletes toward a stretch of packed earth behind the stadium, expecting perhaps sandals or some kind of thin, protective layer. Instead, they step out onto the ground with bare feet that look strangely resilient, the soles toughened into something between leather and quiet defiance. You glance down at your own feet and suddenly feel like they have been living a life of unreasonable luxury. The athletes do not seem bothered by pebbles, dry twigs, or the occasional uneven patch. They move with the natural confidence of people whose feet have spent years negotiating directly with the earth. A trainer notices your hesitation and waves you forward. You step gingerly onto the dirt, immediately alerting several nerve endings that were convinced their last assignment would be plush carpeting. The ground is warm from the sun, textured enough to remind you that every single pebble has an opinion about where it belongs. You try to stand naturally, but your toes clench in defensive anticipation. The trainer suppresses a smile and tells you to relax, which is impossible because your feet have entered survival mode. The athletes begin their warm-up laps, and you watch in fascination as their strides stretch long and graceful. Without shoes, their feet land with a softness that surprises you. Each step seems to roll from front to back, the toes spreading and gripping the earth before releasing. There is no heavy slapping or jarring impact. Their bodies stay aligned, their posture steady, their movements quiet. You never realized how much noise modern shoes make until now, where the only sounds are breathing, the rustle of fabric, and the faint whisper of skin meeting soil. You attempt to follow them, lifting your knees with exaggerated caution. The first few steps feel awkward, your weight shifting improperly, your heels digging into the ground in ways the trainer immediately tells you to stop. He positions your feet, showing you how to land lightly on the front, letting the arch absorb the shock. When you try it, the movement feels strange but immediately more comfortable. As if your joints are relieved, you finally consulted them. Your stride shortens instinctively, forcing you to move in a controlled rhythm rather than the heavy pounding you unconsciously default to. One athlete jogs beside you, demonstrating how the feet adapt with each step. His ankles flex with smooth precision, his toes spreading on impact to stabilize his body. Watching him, you notice the entire leg participates in the process. Nothing is passive. Every tendon and muscle engages with purpose. This is not just running. It is a full conversation between body and ground, one you have been ignoring your entire life. The group transitions into drills. They sprint, their feet flicking back in tight arcs before landing again with almost delicate placement. They hop on one leg, then the other, maintaining balance as if gravity has decided to grant them a small courtesy. They leap forward, landing softly, bending their knees to absorb impact with the kind of natural athleticism that makes you question whether you have ever truly used your legs correctly. The trainer mentions that barefoot running builds strength throughout the feet and lower legs, areas modern shoes try so hard to protect that they eventually weaken. You try a few hops yourself and immediately wobble, like a newborn foal coming to terms with its existence. A nearby athlete steadies you with one hand, adjusting your posture. He tells you to trust the ground, which sounds poetic until you remember the ground is littered with tiny objects determined to ruin your day. Still, you try again, focusing on control rather than height, and this time you land with a touch more confidence. Your toes spread instinctively, your muscles engage, and for a brief moment, you feel the faint thrill of balance settling through you. The athletes transition to sprints, and you watch them explode across the field, with power that seems both raw and efficient. Their feet strike with precision, each step tuned to maximize energy return. They move in a rhythm modern shoes often disguise, a natural cadence shaped by lifelong practice. Their speed does not seem forced. It seems earned in a way your body suddenly respects. When they finish, they stand comfortably on the dirt, breathing hard but not shifting around in discomfort. Their feet are dusty but unharmed, the kind of feet built to carry them across uneven terrain without a second thought. You look down at yours again, feeling both impressed and slightly betrayed by your own arches. As the session ends, you understand something fundamental. Running without shoes is not a novelty or a challenge here. It is the foundation of their technique, shaping every muscle, every tendon, every reflex. Barefoot mechanics force the body to engage fully, turning each stride into a collaboration between strength and sensitivity. Watching them move, you see why. Their speed feels different, why their endurance carries such depth. And you realize that in a world where every step connected directly to the earth, greatness began from the soles upward. You sit beneath an olive tree at the edge of the gymnasium, expecting perhaps a lecture on breathing, discipline, or the importance of not collapsing mid-training session. Instead, the philosophers surrounding you settle into the shade with the calm assurance of men preparing to reshape your understanding of reality. Their robes rustle softly as they sit, each movement deliberate. You sense immediately that this conversation will not be simple. These are men who can turn a question about lunch into a debate about the purpose of desire. One of them studies you with a thoughtful expression, as if examining not your muscles but the machinery of your thoughts. He begins by asking why you believe an athlete succeeds. You open your mouth to offer something about strength or practice, but he raises a finger, kindly but firmly, and tells you that those are merely the outer layers of a much deeper truth. The body, he says, is the instrument. The mind is the musician. Without alignment between the two, no performance can be extraordinary. You watch as another philosopher draws a circle in the dirt. He taps the center, explaining how every action radiates from intention. A runner who fears the starting line tenses before the first step. A wrestler who doubts his grip weakens his own hold. A jumper who questions his flight sinks before leaving the ground. They speak of the way thought travels through the body, shaping posture, breath, and movement long before a single muscle flexes. You feel yourself instinctively straightening under the weight of their words. They guide your attention to the athletes nearby. The wrestlers practicing throws are not simply testing their strength. They are rehearsing confidence. You notice how each one steps forward with certainty, not because they always win, but because they believe the moment is worth meeting with full presence. The sprinters stretching along the track are not merely preparing their legs. They are preparing their minds to accept speed long before their bodies generate it. Even the discus throwers, standing motionless before their rotations, are clearing their thoughts as carefully as they position their feet. One philosopher leans closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "The greatest athletes," he says, "do not ask whether they are capable. They ask whether they are willing to endure discomfort, willing to meet fear without flinching, willing to hold focus when the world around them erupts in noise, willing to become, for a fleeting moment, the most complete version of themselves." He gestures toward the stadium, reminding you that the ancient games were not just competitions. They were acts of devotion, to skill, to honor, to the spirit that moved through each competitor. As you listen, you feel a shift inside you, subtle at first. The idea that physical ability is shaped by belief sounds poetic, yet you cannot deny the evidence unfolding all around. One philosopher invites you to breathe with intention. He instructs you to imagine strength gathering in your chest with each inhale. You try it, feeling slightly ridiculous, but something changes. Your breath deepens, your shoulders settle, your heartbeat steadies into a more confident rhythm. The philosopher notices and smiles as if he has just watched a seed take root. Another asks you to stand. He guides your stance gently, positioning your feet, adjusting your spine, tilting your chin. Then he tells you to picture yourself grounded, unshakable. He asks you to imagine effort flowing from a place of certainty rather than strain. When you shift your weight forward, the movement feels smoother, as if your body has taken a quiet cue from your thoughts. The philosophers speak of athletes who transformed, not because their bodies changed, but because their minds did. They recount stories of runners who visualized entire races before stepping onto the track, wrestlers who meditated on calmness until their strength became deliberate rather than explosive, and throwers who imagined the arc of their objects so vividly that their bodies simply followed the picture. By the time the discussion winds down, the sun has shifted, casting new shadows across the ground. You realize that the philosophers never once spoke of victory. They spoke only of mastery, presence, and purpose. You rise from the earth feeling different, not stronger but clearer. They tell you gently that the body grows from repetition, but it is the mind that chooses how far it can go. And as you return toward the athletes, you sense that your understanding of capability has expanded. You carry with you the quiet certainty that greatness does not begin in the limbs. It begins in the thoughts that guide them. You follow a group of athletes toward a quiet grove near the edge of the sanctuary, expecting perhaps a brief moment of reflection, maybe a quick prayer before training. Instead, you find priests preparing a ritual with a level of seriousness usually reserved for storms, omens, or conversations with people who control your taxes. The air grows still as the priests arrange small offerings on a stone altar. Olive branches, a bowl of grain, a flask of oil, and a few items that look suspiciously like someone forgot their lunch but decided it was sacred anyway. The athletes stand in a semicircle, shoulders broad and heads slightly bowed, each one carrying a quiet intensity that feels different from the physical focus you have seen in training. This is not the anticipation before a race or the bracing breath before a lift. This is something deeper, heavier, almost electric. The priests begin to chant, their voices low and rhythmic, weaving through the grove like warm smoke. The sound carries weight but not pressure, as if encouraging the world to align itself politely for the upcoming competitions. One priest approaches an athlete, touching an olive branch dipped in oil to his forehead. The athlete closes his eyes, and you watch his entire posture change. His breathing steadies, his shoulders loosen, and a calm settles over his face that makes you feel like he could run through a wall with perfect serenity. Another priest traces a symbol in the air over a wrestler's chest, murmuring blessings meant to fortify his spirit, sharpen his courage, and keep fear at bay. The wrestler nods, accepting the blessing with a solemnity that leaves no room for mockery. You realize quickly that this ritual is not simply tradition, it is transformation. The athletes absorb the words, the gestures, the presence of the priests as if drawing strength from something invisible. You can see belief sinking into them, igniting a quiet fire that seems to glow behind their eyes. You stand there, surprised at how powerful the past shift is, how tangible the change becomes, even without a single muscle moving. One priest invites you closer. You hesitate, unsure whether you qualify for divine calibration, but he gestures again with a gentleness that dissolves your doubt. He places a hand lightly on your shoulder, his fingers warm and steady, and blesses your curiosity, your effort, your willingness to witness the old ways. His words wash over you in a soft cadence, and for a moment, your thoughts grow very still. Something inside you steadies, like a compass, aligning toward a forgotten direction. When he steps back, he offers a small smile, as if he has just adjusted something subtle but important. You watch as the athletes continue to receive blessings tailored to their events. A sprinter is blessed for swift steps and clarity of mind, a javelin thrower for precision and courage, a long jumper for balance and flight. Each blessing is shaped with intention, weaving confidence into the fabric of their preparation. It becomes clear that belief here is not superstition, it is fuel. As the ritual continues, the priests speak of gods who favor effort, athletes who honor them through discipline, and the sacred thread connecting body and spirit. The athletes listen with reverence, drinking in each word as if the air itself carries strength. You realize that belief transforms more than emotions. It changes posture, breathing, and the way they hold themselves in stillness. Confidence becomes a physical state, settling through their bodies like the weight of armor that makes them stronger rather than slower. When the blessings conclude, the athletes stand taller, their expressions sharpened with a focus that feels almost supernatural. You sense that whatever doubts they carried into the grove have been burned away, replaced by a certainty that radiates through them. It is not arrogance, it is purpose. They leave the grove in silence, their steps sure and powerful, as if the earth has agreed to support them more willingly now. You linger for a moment, feeling the last echoes of chanting drift through the trees. As you watch the athletes return to the stadium, you understand something modern measurements struggle to capture. Belief, when cultivated with this level of devotion, becomes more than emotion. It becomes a force. A quiet, steady, unshakable advantage no stopwatch or sensor can quantify. In this world, mindset is not separate from performance. It is an essential part of it. And as you follow them back toward the arena, you sense how faith, tradition, and confidence intertwine to create an inner strength that elevates the body far beyond what training alone can accomplish. You walk through the heart of Olympia during the height of the festival, and the air feels charged in a way that has nothing to do with the sun or the crowds. People fill every street, leaning over balconies, shouting greetings, arguing cheerfully, carrying baskets of food, children, and the occasional goat. As if none of these objects vary in difficulty, the noise swirls into a kind of living storm that presses against you from all sides, and you sense a truth you had not understood fully until now. These games do not belong to the athletes alone. They belong to everyone. You follow a group of competitors as they navigate the bustling streets. A wrestler barely takes 5 steps before someone claps him on the back hard enough to make you flinch on his behalf. A sprinter receives a string of well-intentioned advice from an elderly man who looks too fragile to stand upright, yet speaks with the confidence of someone who once outran every wolf in Greece. A discus thrower is stopped by a cluster of children who ask him to demonstrate a technique right there in the middle of the walkway. He indulges them, miming the motion with exaggerated slowness, and they scatter with shrieks of delight as if they have just been entrusted with a state secret. You watch how each athlete responds to these encounters. There is pride, certainly, but also a quiet pressure that settles around their shoulders like a familiar cloak. These people do not simply represent themselves, they represent families, villages, mentors, and generations of stories. You see how the crowd's expectations shape the athletes, pushing them, steadying them, reminding them what is at stake even in the smallest movements. When you walk past a group of merchants, you overhear them debating which of the local athletes will triumph. They speak with a confidence that suggests they personally designed each athlete's training plan. Their excitement carries a sharp edge, as though victory will validate not only the competitor but the entire community. A loss would not bring shame, exactly, but it would add a layer of disappointment that everyone would feel. Success here is shared. Failure is shared too, woven into the identity of the people who gather to watch. You accompany a runner returning from morning drills, and people part for him with subtle deference. Not the noisy celebration you have seen before, but something quieter, almost reverent. Parents nudge children to stand straight as he passes. Older men bow their heads slightly. You can feel the runner absorbing all of this, each gesture fueling something inside him that burns with steady intensity. His steps become firmer, his breath deeper. His posture shifts as if he suddenly carries not just his own hopes, but the weight of dozens more. Later, at the training grounds, you notice how this presence lingers long after the crowds fade. Athletes drill with a kind of urgency that goes beyond personal ambition. Their movements carry the echo of voices that encouraged them from childhood, of neighbors who watched them grow, of teachers who insisted they could be great even before they believed it themselves. When a javelin thrower hesitates, another competitor snaps at him with words that, despite their sharpness, are laced with genuine care. The message is clear. The community expects your best because they believe you can give your best. You sit with an athlete resting after a hard session. He tells you that the games are not a stage for individual glory. They are an offering, a way to return something to the people who shaped you. He gestures toward the settlement in the distance, explaining that every victory feeds the pride of the entire community, lifting spirits, strengthening bonds, inspiring the next generation. Every effort, even one that falls short, is part of that shared story. You realize then that the pressure these athletes carry is not crushing. It fortifies them. It gives purpose to every training session, every injury endured, every early morning rise. They strive not to avoid disappointing their people, but to honor the faith placed in them. And that faith, that collective belief, becomes something powerful, something that pushes them beyond what their bodies alone might achieve. As you watch them return to the village at dusk, welcomed by waves of cheers, laughter, and embraces, you understand how this ancient social force shapes performance. Community here is not background noise. It is the engine. It is the wind at their backs, the fire at their heels, the reason their records still stand like monuments. And in that moment, you feel the full truth settle inside you. Greatness is not carried alone. It is built by many hands, many voices, many hopes, merging into one extraordinary push forward. You sit on a stone bench near the judge's platform, squinting at a set of carved wooden tablets that look more like household decorations than official scoring tools. A scribe stands beside them, dipping a reed pen into ink with the confidence of someone who has memorized the rules so thoroughly that he no longer feels obligated to explain them. Athletes gather nearby, waiting for their results with an air of acceptance that puzzles you. They do not argue, do not hover, do not wave. Protest signs demanding instant replay. They simply watch, patient and calm, as though trusting the system entirely. You lean in, trying to decipher how the judges measure things. A discus throw is recorded not by the exact distance, but by whether it surpasses certain markers etched in the earth. A race is judged by who crosses the line first, of course, but wind, heat, terrain, and even the shape of the ground are simply part of the challenge, not variables to be adjusted or smoothed out for fairness. A long jump is measured from the point of takeoff, which is not a carefully painted line, but the place where an athlete's foot actually left the soil, meaning technique shapes the measurement before a single inch of flight is even considered. At first it seems chaotic, but the system has a rhythm. The judges observe with eyes sharpened by years of repetition. They watch the body, the arc, the landing, the interaction between athlete and environment. Their measurements are a blend of precision and interpretation, a combination that makes you faintly anxious because you have grown used to devices that beep, flash, and measure down to a fraction most humans cannot perceive. A trainer notices your confusion and explains why these metrics differ so dramatically from modern ones. Ancient scoring captures performance within the full context of the moment. A jump on wet ground is still a jump. A sprint under harsh sun is still a sprint. Athletes are measured not just by raw output, but by the conditions they overcame, the efficiency of their movement, and the spirit they displayed. The judges weigh these factors with subtlety, seeing things no stopwatch or laser sensor could ever register. As an athlete steps forward to hear his result, the judge announces it with a calm authority. The crowd reacts not to a number but to the achievement itself. They cheer because he surpassed a boundary, because his technique was brilliant, because the moment felt worthy of praise. You realize the metric is less important than the impression left behind. Performance is not reduced to a sterile list of digits. It lives in the minds of those who witnessed it. You compare this to the modern world, where measurements try to cut reality into perfect slices. Hundredth of a second differences determine glory. Records rise or fall based on surface science, wind allowances, and technological precision that narrows the definition of excellence until it becomes a thin thread stretched tight between rules. Here, the definition is broader, shaped by the fullness of the effort rather than the exactness of the outcome. One judge invites you closer, showing how he evaluates a long jump. He does not pull out a device. He watches how cleanly the athlete leaves the earth, how high the arc rises, how fluidly the landing unfolds. He measures the distance with a simple rope marked at intervals, but his commentary focuses more on execution than on numbers. You realize that even when the present-day distance seems modest by modern standards, the technique may have been extraordinary for the conditions. Context is everything. As you continue observing, you begin to see how modern comparisons often misinterpret ancient achievements. Today's rules rely on precision that isolates performance from environment, stripping away variables to produce clean, comparable data. But ancient metrics embrace those variables, making each feat uniquely colored by the day it occurred. A record here might reflect not only strength but strategy, not only speed but adaptation, not only technique but resilience. And suddenly, it becomes clear why the surviving numbers seem so perplexing. They are ghosts of performances that once lived in a world with different expectations, different measurements, different priorities. Modern analysts chase them like puzzles missing half their pieces, unaware that the pieces were never meant to fit the same way in the first place. As you watch another result announced and the crowd erupts in pride, you finally understand the ancient records are more than distances and times. They are stories. They are snapshots of moments shaped by people, environment, belief, and effort. Trying to compare them directly to modern results is like comparing shadows to the figures that cast them. And in that moment, you feel the weight of this truth. The ancient athletes were not trying to fit into our system. They were thriving in theirs. You kneel beside a weathered slab of stone, brushing dust from grooves that look like claw marks left by some extremely organized beast. The inscriptions are shallow in places, deeper in others, as though each scribe carved according to his own opinion about how permanent this information needed to be. A guide claims these marks record the achievements of champions, but at first glance, they read more like riddles written by someone who enjoyed being confusing. Distances are listed without units. Victories are tallied in categories that seem familiar until they suddenly break off into something that feels like a prank. You tilt your head, hoping the symbols will reorganize themselves into sense. They do not. A scholar joins you, lowering himself with a groan that suggests his joints have endured more than a lifetime of stone benches. He begins explaining the inscriptions with an enthusiasm that borders on alarming. According to him, some events were not measured as a single performance, but as a sequence. A long jump might be recorded as a total of several attempts strung together, each performed with halteres in a rhythm closer to a dance than a leap. A race might include a turnaround point marked by a post, forcing athletes to pivot sharply and lose momentum, something modern sprints avoid at all costs. Even the stadium race, seemingly straightforward, varied depending on which version was used that year. You stare at him, realizing the ancient games did not merely resemble modern athletics with dustier clothing. They were built differently from the ground up. You trace a line of symbols that supposedly represent a record in the hoplite race, a sprint performed in full armor. The inscription notes not only the time but the shield's weight, the condition of the track, and the presence of wind that may have hindered or assisted competitors. It almost reads like a miniature story baked into stone. The scholar points out that many of these variables changed yearly. Some races were held on uphill slopes, others on ground so dry that each step produced a miniature dust storm. Athletes adapted, and the inscriptions preserved both their success and the conditions that shaped it. When you find an entry describing a wrestling victory, you expect details about technique or the number of falls, but the text instead tracks how quickly the opponent submitted, as though surrender speed were the true measure of dominance. Another inscription lists a pancration triumph that includes a brief comment about the fighter's creative use of footwork in a match that lasted long enough to attract an impatient crowd. These notes feel personal, as if a judge wanted future readers to understand not just who won, but how the moment played out. The deeper you read, the more modern comparisons unravel. Events that look similar on the surface shift into entirely different creatures. The ancient pentathlon, for example, bundles together disciplines in an order that seems intentionally designed to exhaust the participants by the time they reach the final round. The scoring is not cumulative in the modern sense. You either won enough individual events to dominate, or you fell behind and were eliminated early, no matter how heroic your overall performance might have been. You begin to realize that many ancient records cannot be mapped cleanly onto modern charts because the events themselves have no direct equivalents. A long jump with halteres is not really the same as a long jump without them. A race with a hairpin turn is not a modern sprint. A discus shaped from bronze with a lopsided weight distribution does not follow the same physics as a contemporary plate designed by engineers. The inscriptions function more like snapshots from a world with its own rules, strategies, and expectations. A moment of clarity settles in as you run your fingers over the last recorded achievement. These stone tablets do not preserve raw numbers. They preserve context, shape, ritual, and design. They capture sports that evolved naturally from the landscape, culture, and values of a particular time. Modern events have become standardized, refined into universal templates measured by exacting tools. Ancient events grew wild, unique to each festival, each season, each sculpted stone marker awaiting an athlete's approach. You lean back, feeling the truth settle into your bones. The records left behind are not mysterious because they exaggerate ancient capabilities. They are mysterious because they belong to a world of sport that no longer exists, a world whose structure cannot be neatly folded into modern comparisons. And for the first time, the inscriptions feel less like riddles and more like echoes, calling across centuries from games that played by their own unforgettable rules. You follow a trainer into a shaded corner of the gymnasium, where the ground is packed hard from countless footsteps, and the air smells faintly of oil, dust, and whatever herbs someone crushed nearby with the confidence of a man who believes strongly in plants. A few athletes sit or lie on mats woven from reeds, each one bearing the unmistakable look of someone who has pushed a muscle a bit too far or taken a fall slightly harder than planned. Yet none of them seem panicked, frustrated, or eager to complain. They look almost serene, as though injuries are simply checkpoints on a longer path rather than obstacles. A wrestler sits with his arm wrapped in a poultice that resembles mashed leaves held together with determination. A runner winces as a trainer presses a thumb deep into the side of his calf, muttering encouragement that somehow sounds comforting and slightly threatening at the same time. You watch as another athlete stretches his ribs slowly, breathing through discomfort with the steady confidence of someone who has done this many times before. The trainer explains that injury is not considered an interruption to training but an extension of it. The body learns, adapts, strengthens, and sometimes breaks, and each stage requires attention. Recovery here is not about stopping, it is about shaping. You notice how none of the athletes treat pain like a surprise. They accept it the way farmers accept seasons, as something inevitable and natural. It shifts your perspective. You are used to thinking of recovery as repair, but here it feels more like cultivation. The trainer kneels beside a discus thrower with a strained shoulder and begins massaging warm olive oil into the joint. The slow circles look simple, almost casual, but the thrower exhales with a relief that makes you think those fingers may hold ancient secrets. You ask what is in the oil, expecting a list of ingredients, perhaps a rare extract or mystical resin. The trainer shrugs and tells you it is olive oil, plain, ordinary, ubiquitous olive oil. But the method, he adds with a wink, is what matters. The intention behind each movement, the pressure, the warmth, the rhythm. Recovery is not just treatment, it is a dialogue with the body. Nearby, a boy no older than early adolescence limps in with a bruised ankle. Instead of sending him away to rest, the trainer teaches him how to walk on it gently, how to let the discomfort guide him without overwhelming him. He explains that avoiding pain entirely is not the goal. Understanding it is, you realize this child will grow into an athlete who does not fear injury because he learned from the beginning that setbacks can be navigated rather than avoided. One athlete with a wrapped torso lies flat, while another competitor encourages him to breathe deeply. Slow inhalations, slow exhalations, grounding the body through the process. You see how recovery becomes a shared effort. The athletes support one another, pressing knots from each other's muscles, adjusting posture, offering jokes that ease the weight of soreness. Pain becomes less isolating when it is witnessed, understood, and woven into the rhythm of daily practice. The trainer invites you to sit and offers to demonstrate a technique on your arm, which instantly makes you reassess how much tension you carry without noticing. His hands feel firm and steady, and he speaks softly about how the ancient athletes believed resilience came not from avoiding strain, but from meeting it with awareness. If you deny pain, it grows. If you listen to it, it guides you. You watch as athletes return to training with movements scaled by instinct rather than strict rules. A sprinter with a tender knee jogs lightly, never stopping completely. A jumper practices balance instead of leaps. A fighter drills footwork while keeping his injured hand tucked close. No one halts their journey. They redirect it. By the time you leave the recovery area, you understand something modern sports sometimes forget. The ancients did not treat the body like a machine to be kept pristine. They treated it like a living system shaped by pressure, strengthened by strain, and taught by discomfort. Their methods may appear simple, almost rustic, but their results speak through the endurance and adaptability of every competitor walking across the dust. Resilience here is not an outcome, it is a practice, and as you step back into the sunlit grounds of Olympia, you feel a quiet respect for athletes who learned not just how to push their limits, but how to return from their breaking points stronger than before. You wake before the sun, guided more by the soft sounds of movement than by any conscious decision of your own. The athlete you are shadowing is already awake, already stretching, already existing in that focused place between sleep and effort. He moves with familiarity through the pre-dawn shadows, the quiet air cool against skin that will soon heat with exertion. You follow him to the training grounds where only a handful of early risers stand beneath torches that flicker gently, throwing thin bands of light across the earth. There is no rush, no barked command, no rigid schedule pinned to a board. Yet everything unfolds with smooth intention. He begins with breath, slow and deliberate. Every inhale expanding the ribs, every exhale anchoring him deeper into the morning. Then come the movements. Small at first, modest stretches that lengthen into sweeps of the arms and rotations of the shoulders. His feet scrape the ground lightly, testing the surface, feeling how the earth responds to him, letting the texture and firmness guide his expectations for the day. You find yourself moving without instruction, swaying as he does, pulled into the rhythm of preparation simply by being near it. As the sun climbs and the grounds fill, the quiet warm-up shifts into practice. He joins others in a sequence of drills that seem effortless from afar, but reveal sharp discipline up close. There is work in every gesture, strength woven into each repetition, concentration pressed like weight against his brow. Trainers walk among them, correcting angles, adjusting posture, murmuring reminders that land like small stones, shaping the flow of a river. Your athlete takes each suggestion without frustration, absorbing it as naturally as he absorbs the sunlight gathering on his back. By midday, sweat threads down his arms, turning the dust beneath his feet into thin streaks of muddied grit. He drinks softly spiced water that tastes faintly of herbs and something else you cannot place, and he eats a handful of olives as though they contain ancient wisdom. He does not rest fully, not yet. The pause is brief, a momentary stillness before the storm of competition. You see excitement creep into his eyes, not wild or frantic, but steady, like a flame sheltered from the wind. When the call comes, he walks to the stadium with the measured confidence of someone who has lived this moment many times, even if only in memory or imagination. The crowd roars before he even steps onto the track. It is the kind of sound that would rattle your bones if you let it, but he seems to grow taller from it, drawing strength from the expectation that presses in from every direction. The earth beneath his feet feels different now, tighter, more alive, as though it too prepares for the moment. You stand near the edge, feeling your pulse sync with his as he takes his position. The world narrows. The crowd fades into a distant hum. The heat rises from the ground. And then the signal comes. He explodes forward, not with reckless force, but with polished power built through countless mornings like the one you witnessed. Each stride cuts through the air, each breath fueling the next, each movement a testament to the parts of training most people never see. You shout without meaning to, swept into the ferocity of the moment, watching him cross the line with a final surge that ripples through the stadium. The noise crashes around him. Hands reach out. Voices chant his name. Yet he stays calm, offering a nod here, a smile there, accepting praise without drowning in it. Victory feels like a shared breath rather than a personal triumph. You see exhaustion in his shoulders, but also fulfillment, a glow that comes not from winning but from meeting the challenge fully. After the celebration fades, he returns quietly to the training grounds. Sweat still clings to him, dust streaks his legs, but there is a softness in his steps now. The trainers ease him back into slow stretches, gentle pressure, warm oil worked into tired muscles. He breathes deeply, letting tension flow out with each exhale. You see how rest is not an afterthought, but a deliberate practice, an integral part of the cycle that prepares him for the next rise of the S. By nightfall, he lies on a simple mat, eating bread, honey, and fruit with the kind of appetite that comes from honest effort. His eyes grow heavy. He settles into sleep with no second thoughts, no lingering doubts, only the quiet certainty that tomorrow he will begin again. And as you watch him drift into slumber, you understand that greatness here is not a single moment, but the graceful arc, connecting preparation, performance, and renewal. You step out into the open grounds of Olympia at midday, and the heat lifts immediately against your skin, a thick, shimmering presence that feels less like weather and more like an ancient personality watching you from above. The sun hangs heavy, not the polite warmth you know, but a relentless, unwavering blaze that seems determined to teach you humility. Dust shifts beneath your feet, soft enough to swallow your sandals if you linger, yet firm enough in some patches to trick you into thinking it might behave predictably. It does not. Every step carries a small surprise, and you realize this land shapes athletes before any trainer ever touches them. The air itself smells of olive trees, dry earth, and a faint mineral tang drifting in from distant hills. You breathe it in and feel your lungs adjust, as though they must widen to accommodate something older and rougher than what they are used to. You watch athletes training in this environment and notice immediately how their bodies respond to it with casual familiarity. Their skin glows not because of oil or effort alone, but because they have lived under this sun since childhood, absorbing its demands until they became part of their strength. A runner trots past you, barely sweating despite the temperature turning you into a slow stew. His stride does not falter as he moves across uneven ground, navigating dips and ripples in the earth with unconscious precision. He was shaped by this landscape long before he chose his sport. His calves hardened on slopes that would leave most modern athletes gasping. His lungs learned rhythm in air, thick with heat and dust. His balance was refined on surfaces that shifted under every footfall. You begin to understand that his performance today is built from years of living in training conditions no controlled stadium can replicate. You wander toward the riverbank, where another group trains. The water glints in the sunlight, like hammered bronze, and even from a distance you can feel the contrast it creates. Cool air rising in faint waves that brush your face. Athletes gather here to cool their limbs, to let their bodies recover naturally. They wade in with the ease of people who have done this forever, letting the current roll over sore muscles. You notice how their recovery is shaped by the land, just as their exertion is. The river is not a luxury, it is part of the system. As you follow them back to the grounds, the climate shifts again. A breeze drifts from the hills, carrying the scent of pines and something crisp that hints at altitude. You realize that the ancient athletes trained within a landscape that offered every type of physical challenge within walking distance. Hills for strength, flat stretches for speed, forest edges for agility, dry heat to test endurance, and cool water to restore what the day stripped away. It is a natural laboratory, fine-tuned without intention, shaping bodies through constant exposure rather than specialized sessions. When you stand in the stadium's open bowl, you feel the sun bounce off the pale ground with an intensity that tightens your throat. Athletes here do not just fight opponents, they fight the environment, learning to thrive in conditions that wear on you after only an hour. You watch a discus thrower rotate, the heat rippling around him, glinting off his bronze disc. He moves with confidence born from familiarity. His ancestors trained in the same sun, breathed the same dry air, felt the same dust cling to their legs. Their bodies adapted generation after generation, building a kind of resilience and efficiency that no indoor facility can imitate. You begin to accept a truth you had sensed, but not fully grasped. Modern conditions aim to equalize performance, to control variables so that every athlete competes on the same surface, in the same temperature, with the same air quality. Ancient conditions did the opposite. They sharpened athletes by exposing them to extremes, shaping abilities that grew directly from the earth itself. As the day fades and the heat loosens its grip, you feel the environment settle around you like a slowly cooling forge. Every rock, every gust of wind, every patch of dust seems filled with memory. You realize that ancient athletes were not simply strong or fast. They were grown by this place, molded by a climate that demanded adaptation from childhood, forged by an environment that never softened for convenience. And standing there, you understand why some of their feats still puzzle you. They were shaped not just by training, but by a world that no longer exists. A world where nature itself played the role of coach, challenger, and silent companion. You hear it before you see anything. A slow beat, steady as a heartbeat, carried across the training grounds by the morning breeze. It is not music in the modern sense. There are no instruments layered atop one another, no polished melodies designed for playlists. It is a single drum, deep and resonant, its voice echoing through the olive grove like the pulse of the earth itself. You follow the sound, and soon find a circle of athletes moving in time with it, their bodies rising and falling in fluid synchronization. A poet stands nearby, reciting verses with a calm, rhythmic cadence. His voice blends with the drum beat until it becomes impossible to tell where the words end and the rhythm begins. The athletes match their movements to his voice, adjusting speed and intensity as the lines shift. A sprinter lengthens his strides when the poet lifts his tone, then shortens them when the lines soften into whispers. A discus thrower rehearses the sweeping rotation of his torso, the turn of his hip aligning with each strike of the drum. You watch them absorb the sound through their bodies, letting it guide the pace the way a river guides a boat. You step into the circle without meaning to, drawn by a rhythm that seems older than memory. The ground beneath you vibrates softly, as though the drum beat travels through the soil. A trainer gestures for you to mimic the movements of the nearest athlete. You hesitate for a moment, then lift your arms and sway to the beat, surprised at how instantly your breathing falls into pattern. The music does not push you, it guides you, offering a tempo that steadies your thoughts and anchors your attention in the present. The poet's verses shift into a chant about courage and precision. The athletes raise their intensity, muscles tightening with each emphasized syllable. Sweat gathers and shines on their skin, yet their faces remain calm. The rhythm carries them. You see how the beat transforms their focus, giving shape to the abstract idea of effort. Instead of chasing speed or power, they chase alignment. Every movement is set within a musical frame, making even the hardest drills feel purposeful rather than punishing. A trainer explains that music is not merely accompaniment, it is instruction. A consistent rhythm teaches breathing patterns, helping athletes control their intake of air during exertion. A rising tempo sharpens reflexes. A slowed beat teaches patience and precision. Poetry adds narrative, giving meaning to repetition. When you repeat a motion hundreds of times, the mind can wander, but verse holds it steady, tying concentration to imagery and intention. You notice how the athletes respond to changes in the poet's tone. When he grows quiet, movements soften. When he bellows a line meant to evoke strength, the entire group seems to thicken with power, their steps hitting the ground more firmly. It feels less like a training session and more like a living dialogue between sound and body. The music shapes effort. The effort shapes the rhythm. The poet adapts, adjusting verses to match the athlete's energy. Nothing is fixed. Everything flows. After the drill, the group gathers around a lyre player who begins plucking strings with delicate precision. The mood shifts instantly. The drum's urgency fades, replaced by a soft, soothing pattern that settles into your chest like warm light. The athletes lie back on the ground, eyes closed, breathing in unison. The music slows the heart, calms the nerves, releases the tension built during practice. You feel yourself sinking into the earth, muscles unwinding without conscious effort. Even your thoughts loosen, drifting in time with the quiet melody. A trainer sits beside you and explains that the mind must be trained as deliberately as the body. Music teaches presence, helping athletes step out of the noise of competition and into a state where decisions come fluidly. Poetry trains memory, focus, and emotional endurance. Rhythm coordinates movement more effectively than shouted commands ever could. The ancients understood that physical mastery grows from mental stillness, and they shaped that stillness with sound. When the music finally stops, the silence feels profound, almost sacred. The athletes rise slowly, refreshed rather than depleted. You stand with them, noticing how your body feels lighter, more aligned, as though the rhythm has rearranged things inside you. And as you walk away from the grove, the drumbeat still echoes faintly in your chest. You understand now that ancient training was not merely physical exertion, it was artistry, a harmonizing of breath, thought, and motion. A quiet reminder that the path to greatness is not just measured in strength, but in the rhythms that shape it. You follow a group of athletes away from the stadium, expecting perhaps another set of drills with halteres or a lecture on breathing from a stern trainer. Instead, they lead you toward the outskirts of Olympia, where farmland spreads in wide, sun-baked strips, and the air smells of grain, earth, and the faint sweetness of ripening figs. At first you assume they are simply taking a break, but then you notice the tools scattered across the fields. Wooden plows, stone weights, baskets of rocks, bundles of timber tied with fraying rope. Nothing about this looks like a gym, yet the athletes treat it as one. A farmer greets them with a grin that suggests he has been waiting eagerly for extra hands. He hands one of the wrestlers a yoke fitted with 2 heavy jugs of water. The wrestler settles it across his shoulders, adjusting until the balance feels right, then begins walking in long, deliberate strides down a narrow path between olive trees. The water sloshes in a slow rhythm that tests his stability far more than any balanced barbell could. You watch his muscles shift as he fights not just weight but movement. The farmer nods approvingly, as though this is perfectly normal athletic conditioning. Nearby, a long jumper helps lift a massive stone used to anchor irrigation channels. It takes 3 men to tip it, and even then it moves reluctantly, sliding across the dry ground as if objecting to being disturbed. The jumper strains, planting his feet wide, breathing in steady bursts. When the stone finally shifts into place, he steps back with the satisfaction of someone who has just completed a full body workout and repaired infrastructure at the same time. You wander farther and find a group dragging a large wooden sled piled with bundles of wheat. The rope bites into their palms, their backs curve, their legs dig into the ground. With a determination that looks almost heroic, they lean into each pull, their bodies forming a single line of effort. The sled jerks forward in slow inches until it finally reaches the storage shed. They release the rope with triumphant grins, laughing as if this labor were a sport in itself. A trainer walks beside you, explaining that strength here is built from the demands of daily life. These athletes grew up hauling water, carrying stones, chopping wood, and climbing terraces that rise at angles you suspect violate some modern safety code. Their bodies learn to adapt not to symmetrical weight machines, but to awkward, shifting loads. A basket of rocks has no handle. A beam of timber rolls unpredictably on the shoulder. A sack of grain sits heavily on one side, forcing the carrier to fight imbalance with every step. You watch a sprinter help gather olives from low branches. He carries a basket that fills unevenly, its weight pulling him slightly off-center as he moves. The trainer points out how this develops stabilizing muscles, the hidden architecture beneath the visible strength. You begin to see how each task becomes a lesson. Lifting teaches control. Carrying teaches endurance. Dragging teaches coordinated force. Even the repetitive bending and straightening required for harvesting strengthens the body in ways that mirror athletic movement. At one point, a discus thrower is given a crude wooden lever to pry loose a stubborn rock embedded in the soil. He braces himself, pushes downward, and shifts his weight the way he would during a throw. The motion engages his torso, hips, and shoulders with precision born from necessity rather than design. The rock finally pops free, and he laughs as though the earth itself has acknowledged his strength. You begin helping too, mostly because it feels wrong to stand idly while everyone else works. You carry a bundle of sticks to a fire pit, and by the time you reach it, your arms tremble slightly. The athletes tease you warmly, not unkindly, pointing out that strength built this way is slow, gritty, and honest. No metal plates, no squeaking machines, no digital readouts. Just you, the weight, and however cleverly you can manage to move it. As the sun begins to drop, the farmers thank the athletes with figs, fresh bread, and small cups of diluted wine. The work has left everyone dusty, tired, and oddly cheerful. The trainer explains that this kind of labor shapes mental endurance as much as physical strength. When you lift for your community, when your effort keeps water flowing or walls standing, discipline becomes something deeper than personal ambition. Walking back toward Olympia, you realize that ancient strength was not built in isolation. It grew from the land, from necessity, from helping others. These athletes were sculpted by a world that demanded contribution from every limb, every muscle, every ounce of determination. And suddenly, the records make more sense. They were not powered by machines. They were powered by the everyday weight of life itself. You walk into the gymnasium expecting to find something like a modern practice session, a clear hierarchy, a whistle, maybe even a stern figure pacing with a tablet of notes. Instead, you find clusters of athletes gathered in loose circles, laughing, arguing gently, demonstrating movements with the easy confidence of people who have learned as much from each other as from any authority. There is no single commanding presence directing the flow. Training here looks less like a classroom and more like a family kitchen where everyone knows the recipe, but insists on sharing their own twist on it. An older athlete stands beside a young sprinter, adjusting the angle of his foot with the same patience you have seen parents use when teaching a child to write. He speaks softly, occasionally tapping the sprinter's leg or shoulder to emphasize a point. There is no edge of superiority in his tone. He is not lecturing, he is remembering. You see how his past experience becomes a gift, handed forward, shaped by years of trial, failure, improvement, and eventual mastery. The sprinter listens with absolute focus, absorbing each detail without question, not because he is obligated, but because respect here flows naturally. Nearby, a group of wrestlers practices throws. At first, their movements look chaotic, all shifting limbs and sudden bursts of force. But as you watch longer, you notice the structure within the mess. Veterans pair with novices, guiding them through rotations, showing them how to position their hips, how to grip without wasting strength, how to fall without fear. They do not bark instructions. They demonstrate, repeat, adjust, and then step back to let the younger ones try. When someone fails, laughter erupts, not in mockery but in encouragement, as if reminding each other that stumbling is simply part of the path forward. You wander toward a discus thrower demonstrating technique to a boy barely in his teens. The older athlete holds the bronze disc lightly, almost reverently, rolling it from palm to fingertips as he speaks. He shows how weight shifts from heel to toe, how the torso coils like rope pulled taut, how release is not a moment of force but a moment of timing. When the child imitates him with awkward enthusiasm, the older athlete does not correct immediately. He lets the boy feel the movement, lets him learn its shape in his own body before offering guidance. It is mentorship that trusts the process rather than controlling it. A trainer passes by, smiling as though pleased by the chaos. He explains that mentorship here is not a role assigned. It grows naturally from shared time, shared goals, shared struggles. Older athletes guide younger ones because someone once guided them. Knowledge moves through the gymnasium like water through channels, flowing where it is needed without formal boundaries. This is why athletes remain connected long after their fallow, competitive years. They carry the history of those who taught them. You notice how the mentors do not simply teach technique. They teach composure. They teach how to breathe before the start of a race, how to steady the mind before a match, how to face the moment when exhaustion floods the body and whispers that you cannot continue. They share stories of their own missteps, recounting mistakes with a kind of affectionate nostalgia, turning past failures into lessons that soften the path for the next generation. When you sit with a group resting in the shade, the dynamic becomes even clearer. The older athletes tease the younger ones with warmth, reminding them that excellence does not grow from intensity alone. It grows from connection. It grows from being part of something larger than yourself. They share food, advice, and memories with the same openness. A sprinter passes bread to his trainee, telling him that eating too quickly before a race once made him lose spectacularly. Everyone laughs, including the trainee, who now has a lesson he will likely remember forever. Later, as the sun lowers, you watch an older athlete wrap his arm around a novice's shoulders, guiding him through the stadium gates. The gesture is simple, unremarkable, yet heavy with meaning. It says you belong here, and I will help you find your place. It says we will carry the weight of this together. And in that moment, you understand the quiet strength in this system. These athletes do not train alone. They grow within a web of shared wisdom, shared effort, shared humanity. Greatness here is built not by a single authoritative voice, but by many gentle ones, passed hand to hand like a torch kept burning through generations. You first notice it when an athlete refuses to step onto a particular patch of ground. He approaches it, slows, shifts sideways with the subtlety of someone avoiding a puddle, then continues warming up without comment. You assume instinct or distraction until another athlete does the exact same thing, detouring around that same innocent stretch of earth as though it harbors some ancient curse. When you ask about it, they shrug and explain that a champion once twisted his ankle there centuries ago, and ever since, no one has trusted the spot. You laugh lightly, expecting them to join you, but they simply nod in solemn agreement. The ground apparently holds memories. As you move deeper into the training grounds, you begin catching glimpses of these rituals everywhere. A runner ties his sandals in a specific sequence, muttering under his breath. A discus thrower taps his disc 3 times against his thigh before lifting it to shoulder height. A group of wrestlers circles each other, performing a brief, synchronized routine of slaps to arms and chest that looks equal parts intimidation and dance. At first, it all feels charmingly eccentric, a collection of habits born from tradition rather than logic. But the more time you spend watching, the more you sense a strange cohesion weaving through it all. A trainer explains that superstition is not merely tolerated here, it is respected. Rituals keep athletes calm, focused, and anchored. A man who believes the right sequence of movements can chase away misfortune performs that sequence with full attention. A woman who refuses to train without her lucky strip of cloth wrapped around her wrist becomes more attuned to her own body because she associates the cloth with readiness. Belief guides behavior, and behavior shapes performance. You observe a javelin thrower preparing for practice. He stands terribly still, holding his spear upright while whispering a short string of phrases that sound like a prayer mixed with a pep talk. When he finishes, he rubs a pinch of dirt between his palms and exhales sharply. Then he throws. The spear slices the air with a clean precision that makes your breath catch. You ask if the ritual improves the throw, expecting a confident yes, but he shakes, his head with a smile. It clears the unnecessary thoughts, he says. That is all, and that, somehow, is enough. Nearby, a young athlete hesitates before attempting a lift. He looks toward a weathered statue of Hermes standing in the corner. After a moment of silent pleading directed toward the god of speed and luck, he takes a deep breath and hoists the weight with surprising ease. You consider asking whether he truly believes Hermes intervenes, but you realize the question misses the point. The ritual gives him courage, and courage fuels strength. The mechanism matters less than the effect. You witness a more elaborate superstition when an entire group suddenly halts their drills as a black bird lands on the post, marking the edge of the field. The athletes exchange quick glances. Someone clicks their tongue. Another spits lightly into the dust. They stand silently until the bird finally takes off. When it does, they release their tension in quiet collective relief. Training resumes. Instantly, as though nothing happened, their movements even sharper than before. You feel the shift inside the group, subtle but noticeable. They treated the moment seriously, processed it together, and now carry a renewed sense of unity. A philosopher overhears your curiosity and offers insight. Superstitions, he explains, create patterns of meaning in the uncertain space between intention and outcome. The games demand courage, and rituals give athletes a pathway into that courage. They allow competitors to step away from fear and into familiarity, even if the familiarity comes from seemingly irrational acts. Superstition becomes a mental tool, sharpening focus through repetition and giving shape to the invisible pressures that hover around every competitor. As you continue to watch the athletes, their rituals no longer appear random. They form a kind of language. You see respect in the way they honor an omen. You see discipline in the meticulous steps they follow before performance. You see connection in the shared gestures passed between generations. And you realize that beneath the charm of these superstitions lies a psychological sophistication that rivals any modern mindset training. By the time dusk settles over Olympia, you are no longer surprised when a discus thrower refuses to begin until a cloud passes, or when a runner insists on starting his sprint only after touching a specific stone. These choices no longer look strange. They look human, familiar even, small anchors of certainty in a world built on unpredictable bursts of effort. And as you walk away from the grounds, you understand that superstition here is not a flaw in their training. It is woven into the strength that propels them. It sharpens their minds, steadies their nerves, and turns fear into focus. In its own unexpected way, it works. You wake before dawn on the first day of the festival, roused not by a horn or a command, but by the restless hum of an entire city already in motion. The air carries the scent of crushed herbs, warm bread, and the faint sweetness of early morning wine. You rub your eyes and step into a world that feels halfway between ceremony and celebration, where no one seems entirely sure whether they are preparing for something sacred or simply thrilled that the wait is finally over. The athletes move through the streets with a quiet intensity, but everyone else seems caught in a current of excitement that sweeps along every stall, courtyard, and narrow walkway. As the sun climbs, the crowds swell until the roads feel like rivers of shifting color. Merchants shout playful promises that their figs are unbeatable. Children weave through legs with enviable confidence, and musicians hover at street corners tuning lyres and flutes that will guide the rhythm of the next several days. You watch a group of drummers warming their hands over a small brazier as if preparing their palms for battle. Their laughter is loud and infectious, and several athletes passing by grin in response, their shoulders relaxing just a bit. The first procession begins, and it is impossible not to feel the shift in atmosphere. People line the streets, ready to cheer for athletes they have never met, yet somehow feel deeply connected to. You move with the flow and find yourself walking beside a runner who looks equally overwhelmed and exhilarated. He admits that this part, the noise and the admiration, is harder for him than the sprint itself. But you can see how he straightens, how the energy feeds him, how pride settles into his posture like a welcome weight. Throughout the morning, offerings are made, prayers are spoken, and chants rise and fall like waves. You begin to notice how celebration carries its own form of momentum. Laughter comes easily. Movement feels lighter. Every athlete you meet talks about the festival not as a distraction, but as part of the fuel that carries them through the coming trials. A wrestler tells you that a good feast can build more confidence than a month of drills. A discus thrower swears the rhythm of festival music helps him visualize the perfect arc. Even the quieter athletes absorb something from the crowds, as if the collective joy presses courage into them from every direction. By midday, the feasting begins. Tables appear as if conjured, covered in bread, olives, grapes, roasted meats, and dishes you cannot name but immediately want to try. You sit among strangers who treat you like a long-lost friend. Plates are passed, cups are refilled, stories are shared, and you realize that the celebration is teaching you something essential. No one here competes alone. Even those who race individually carry the weight and encouragement of entire communities. The festival is a reminder that effort matters, that honor is shared, and that triumph, when it happens, belongs to everyone who believed in the athlete long before the starting line. When the games finally begin the next day, the festival does not fade. It changes shape. The music becomes sharper, the cheers louder, the energy more concentrated. You stand at the edge of the field watching athletes step forward, and you can almost see the imprint of the celebration still clinging to them. They draw strength from the memory of songs, from the warmth of shared meals, from the wild, buzzing nights when the whole city glowed with anticipation. Even fatigue seems gentler in this environment, softened by the promise of more feasting and more dancing when the sun goes down. As the festival stretches into yet another evening, you stand in the flickering light of torches while dancers spin around you. The music thrums in your chest, and you understand why the ancient world held these gatherings so fiercely. Celebration here is not a break from competition. It is nourishment, motivation, and reassurance, all woven into one continuous, living rhythm. By the end, as night settles and the drums quiet, you know that the athletes who step onto the fields tomorrow will not be doing so alone. They will be carried by days of joy, by crowds who believe in them, and by the simple truth that celebration, when shared wholeheartedly, becomes its own kind of strength. You first sense something unusual in the air, long before the event begins. The crowd gathers faster than normal, pressing toward the field with a hunger that feels sharper than simple curiosity. Conversations ripple with speculation, half-whispers passed from one person to the next. You catch fragments about a rising star, a challenger breaking patterns, a performance during training that no one could quite believe. By the time you find a place along the edge of the arena, the atmosphere has thickened into something restless, almost charged, like everyone is holding their breath without realizing it. The athlete at the center of all this attention stands apart from the others, stretching with slow, deliberate movements. There is nothing flashy about him, nothing that suggests he has arrived to shatter expectations. Yet the focus of the crowd clings to him as stubbornly as the dust beneath their sandals. You notice how some of the older trainers watch him with narrowed eyes, as though trying to decode a puzzle that refuses to sit still. A few skeptics exchange doubtful looks. One mutters that the conditions are too strange today. Another claims there must be tricks at play, but none of them walk away. When the event is announced, the crowd surges forward with a roar that rolls through your chest. The judges step into place, carefully positioning themselves, measuring ropes and markers with unusual attention. Even they seem aware that something out of the ordinary might unfold. You feel the tension coil tighter with every passing moment. The athlete steps to the starting line. He folds his hands briefly, as if grounding himself, then begins his run. His stride is smooth at first, then astonishingly fast, legs slicing through the air with a precision that looks almost unreal. You sense shock ripple across the field as he accelerates beyond what anyone expected. The murmurs turn into sharp intakes of breath. You lean forward instinctively, drawn in by the sheer intensity of his movement. When he leaps, the stadium seems to fall silent. His body arcs with a grace that bends time for a heartbeat, stretching farther and farther, as though some hidden force has decided to lend him a temporary favor. He lands with a heavy thud that sends dust billowing upward, obscuring him for a moment. The crowd erupts before the dust has even settled, screams and cheers and protests mixing together in a wild, tangled sound. The judges rush forward, measuring, conferring, checking and rechecking their marks with growing disbelief. The final distance is announced, and the arena instantly fractures into two opposing storms. Half the spectators cheer as if they have witnessed a miracle. The other half shout for clarity, insisting the wind was too strong, or the ground tampered with, or the technique unacceptable by traditional standards. You feel the energy spike around you, vibrant and unsettling, mixing awe with suspicion in equal measure. The athlete himself stands quietly, chest rising with heavy breaths and face unreadable. You cannot tell whether he is thrilled or stunned or simply exhausted. He does not raise his arms in victory. He does not argue with those who shout against him. He stands in the center of the chaos he has created, waiting for the world to decide what to make of him. The judges deliberate again, heads bent close, gestures sharp. Their expressions flicker between admiration and caution. They know that the games are not merely athletic displays, but reflections of civic pride, divine favor, and cultural identity. A record that breaks too many expectations at once can feel like a challenge to more than just statistics. You sense the weight of that truth as they finally raise their hands, signaling their verdict. Record stands. The announcement sends a shock through the crowd, louder than any cheer. Some people leap with excitement. Others turn away in frustration, shaking their heads. You watch the athlete step back, shoulders relaxing just slightly, yet even from a distance, you sense he understands what this moment means. His name will be carved into stone, preserved for generations, but the shadow of today's arguments will follow him there. As the crowd disperses, you linger, feeling the lingering tension settle into the dust that hangs low over the arena. You realize that the games are not only tests of strength and speed, but also tests of belief, trust, and the fragile agreement that binds a record to legitimacy. Sometimes the numbers alone are not enough. Sometimes the story surrounding them becomes just as important. You walk away with that truth echoing in your thoughts, the cheers and protests still ringing faintly in the distance. You hear the word purity long before anyone defines it for you. It drifts through conversations between trainers, slips into toasts at communal meals, and echoes in the debates of philosophers who speak as if every athletic triumph reflects the moral health of the entire world. At first, you assume purity refers to clean living or discipline, or maybe a strict avoidance of suspicious herbal concoctions. But as you spend more time among the athletes, you realize the word carries a far more complicated weight, shaped by fears and ideals that feel strangely familiar and utterly foreign at the same time. One morning, you sit with a group of runners as they rub oil into their limbs. They joke easily, teasing one another about form and footwork. Yet, whenever someone brings up a surprising performance or an unbelievable record, the tone shifts. A few runners glance around to ensure no outsiders are listening, then exchange quiet remarks about unnatural help, divine interference, or tricks that go against the spirit of the games. You expect them to mention forbidden plants or secret tonics, but instead they talk about charms, prayers offered with selfish intentions, and rituals performed not for courage but for advantage. To them, this is the boundary. Purity has less to do with substances and more to do with intention. Later, you wander into a shaded courtyard where an elder trainer scolds a young athlete for using a mixture of herbs to numb a sore shoulder. You brace yourself for a lecture about health risks or unfair enhancement, but the trainer's frustration comes from a different place entirely. He insists that pain is part of the contest, that masking it dishonors not only the gods but the audience who trusts the authenticity of what they witness. The young athlete lowers his gaze with the same solemnity one might show a disappointed parent. You realize that here, purity means transparency of struggle. Every effort must be visible, every weakness accepted, every victory earned without dulling the edges that define the human body. When you speak with philosophers, the conversation takes an even stranger turn. They worry less about physical enhancement and more about anything that might distance an athlete from honest excellence. A philosopher explains that if a competitor performs while carried by external magic, divine favoritism, or hidden medicine, the achievement loses its meaning. He claims the games exist to reveal potential that already lives in a person, not to showcase something borrowed. You listen, trying not to think about modern debates that revolve around molecules, chemistry, and lab results. Here, the moral landscape revolves around intention, humility, and a fear of becoming something unnatural in spirit rather than in biology. One afternoon, you happen upon a lively argument between two trainers who disagree about a popular recovery drink made from herbs and honey. One defends it as harmless nourishment. The other insists it edges too close to manipulation. Their debate lasts longer than the athlete's entire warm-up session. Both agree that purity matters, but neither can quite articulate where the line should fall. You find yourself oddly comforted by this. Even in a world that treats purity as sacred, people still argue endlessly about what it means. As the games continue, you observe how deeply these beliefs shape behavior. Athletes refuse massages if they think the oils are too stimulating. They turn down teas that claim to sharpen focus. They scrutinize amulets given as gifts to ensure they are meant as protection, not enhancement. You sense the constant awareness that anything offering too much help feels suspect. The ideal here is effort unadorned, potential revealed through discipline alone. Yet despite all this, fears linger. Rumors drift across the training grounds about a competitor who prayed too fervently or consulted a mysterious wandering healer. You hear whispers that certain victories shine too brightly, that no one should run quite that fast without something unnatural nudging them forward. The suspicion hangs in the air, subtle but ever present, proving that even in a world without laboratories or chemical tests, doubt finds its way into every corner. By the time you step away from the field at dusk, you understand that purity in this ancient world is not about substances, but about trust. Trust in the athlete, trust in the struggle, trust that what unfolds before the crowd is an honest expression of human ability. They fear corruption, yes, but not in the way you expected. They fear anything that separates a person from their authentic effort. And as you watch the last runner vanish into the fading light, you realize that every culture, no matter the era, builds its own fragile definition of fairness, then spends a lifetime trying to protect it. You step into the stadium just as the last light of day slips behind the hills, turning the sky a warm, smoky violet. The crowd gathers in clusters around the field, their earlier shouting softened into a hum that carries a bittersweet edge. The games are ending, and everyone knows it. The air feels heavier, as if it wants to hold on to the final moments before they drift into memory. Torches flicker to life along the perimeter, their flames swaying in a slow rhythm that seems to set the pace for the entire ceremony. Athletes file in with measured steps, no longer bursting with the nervous energy that filled them a few days ago. Their bodies look worn, scraped, sunburned, and bruised, yet there is something deeply proud in the way they walk. You watch them move like people who have been carved down to their truest selves and are not entirely sure how to return to normal life. Each competitor carries stories etched into their faces, from triumphs that brought crowds to their feet to moments where everything went sideways and the dust tasted like humiliation. All of it belongs here now. A hush settles as a herald steps forward. His voice carries across the field, recounting the feats achieved during the festival. He speaks of distances thrown so far they seem to chase the horizon, of runners who swallowed the track in long, fluid strides, of wrestlers whose strength bent the earth beneath them. As he names each champion, the crowd cheers, but the applause is threaded with something deeper, almost reverent. These accomplishments are already shifting, becoming more than physical acts. They are transforming into the kind of stories people will pass down until no one remembers exactly what happened, only how it made them feel. You look around and see the beginnings of myth-making everywhere. A child lifts her arms and pretends to leap like the long jumper who stunned the stadium. A group of teenagers imitate the stance of their favorite discus thrower, laughing as they mimic his serious frown. An older man tells a younger one that the sprinter who won yesterday moved faster than any mortal should, and you can hear in his tone that he half believes divine wind pushed the athlete forward. Facts start slipping into something brighter, something exaggerated, something far more durable. As the ceremony continues, musicians step into the field, their notes carrying through the night with a kind of quiet finality. The melodies wrap around the stories spoken seconds earlier, sealing them into the collective memory. You see athletes lowering their heads, not in exhaustion, but in the realization that their efforts are no longer theirs alone. Their victories now belong to everyone listening. Their failures, too, will be softened into lessons or warnings or anecdotes that will grow funnier or more dramatic with each retelling. A flame is lit in the center of the arena, taller than a person, fed by oil that sends sparks jumping into the sky. It burns with a fierce, almost stubborn brightness, as though it refuses to let the games fade quietly. The crowd circles the blaze, and you step closer until the heat brushes your skin. The athletes stand nearest, forming a ring that marks them as something both ordinary and extraordinary. You watch their faces in the shifting glow and wonder which of them will become legends first, which name will be carved into stone with perfect certainty, and which will be stretched and reshaped by storytellers until the real person becomes unrecognizable beneath layers of wonder. As the final words of the ceremony echo across the stadium, everyone raises their hands toward the flame. For a moment, the entire arena feels suspended in a single breath. The torch crackles, the crowd exhales, and you sense the boundaries of the present beginning to loosen. You stand in that blur between now and forever, understanding that these achievements will not remain simple records. They will grow into tales of impossible strength, divine favor, and human brilliance pushed beyond its limits. The truth will twist, brighten, and bloom, and the athletes who walk out of the stadium tonight will leave footprints that time will gladly exaggerate into legend. You return to the present without any dramatic flash of light or thunderclap. It happens quietly, almost gently, as if time decides you have seen enough and releases its grip. One moment you are surrounded by torches, dust, and the fading chorus of ancient songs, and the next you stand in a world buzzing with electric lights, neat stadiums, and surfaces so smooth they feel artificial under your shoes. The shift leaves you blinking, trying to gather the scattered pieces of what you just lived through. You feel strangely heavier here, as though the clean, conditioned air is too still, too polite, missing the wild bite of Olympia's heat. You walk along a modern track, noticing how even the material itself promises predictability. Every line is crisp, every curve measured, every inch designed for fairness and speed. Yet after what you have seen, it feels like a world built with the wrong assumptions. You picture the ancient runners carving paths through uneven terrain, guided by instinct, grit, and adrenaline sharpened by the roar of thousands, packed shoulder to shoulder beneath the S. Your mind keeps drifting back to their faces, to the ferocity in their eyes, to the way their bodies moved, as if shaped by the land that raised them. You stand still and breathe, waiting for the familiar rhythms of the present to settle around you, but they do not. Instead, you hear echoes of rituals, laughter from festival nights, the low murmur of philosophers describing the connection between mind and body, and the thud of feet pounding across earth that refuses to lie perfectly flat. You think of the wrestlers built by years of manual labor rather than machines, the throwers guided by rhythms older than the city they competed in, and the distance runners whose lungs were trained by hills, heat, and unrelenting daily motion. As you walk the length of the track, your steps feel almost too light, too cushioned. The athletes you watched carried a different kind of strength, a lived strength, shaped by necessity rather than structured training programs. You remember the boy chasing goats up a rocky slope for fun, the village women hauling water farther than any gym circuit demands, the men whose hands were permanently hardened by ropes, tools, and stone. Their bodies were not built by schedules. They were built by life itself. You pause near the starting line, imagining one of those ancient sprinters crouching there. You can almost see him glancing around in confusion, wondering where the dust went and why the air smells like rubber. You suspect his time might not dazzle on paper, yet the power in his stride would still ripple through you. You think of the long jumper who flew farther than seemed possible because he understood the timing between weight and lift better than any modern athlete wielding numbers and theory. You picture the discus thrower who trained with a rhythm that began in poetry and ended in perfect rotation. And you finally understand why the records carved into stone still challenge the present. They were not created by technique alone. They were born from an entire world woven into every motion. A world where celebration fed bravery, where community pride added fire to each step, where superstition shaped focus, where belief made courage easier to reach. A world where an athlete did not simply train, he existed inside his sport every moment of his life. The modern world can measure speed and strength with incredible precision, yet some parts of performance resist being captured by metrics. Those pieces live in rituals, in culture, in the subtle ways people carry themselves when everything they do feels rooted in meaning. To break a record from that world, you realize, would require reclaiming more than lost techniques. It would mean rediscovering the spirit that knit together effort, belief, and identity. You stand quietly at the edge of the field, letting that truth settle. The ancient numbers endure not because they cannot be surpassed by raw physical ability, but because they were forged inside a way of living that no longer exists. To challenge them now would demand stepping into a different kind of life, one built on intensity, purpose, and connection to something larger than personal achievement. As you leave the track, you feel the echo of Olympia following you, a reminder that history does not cling to numbers. It clings to what those numbers meant.